The grand piano in the Morgan Law Group lobby had been silent for years. A decorative piece, much like the towering marble columns in crystal chandeliers. Beautiful but untouched. Richard Cooper noticed it every morning as he polished the marble floors, occasionally running a calloused finger along its polished surface, remembering a different life. Today was different. Victoria Morgan, the firm's formidable founder, was pacing the lobby in her signature crimson suit, barking orders into her phone about a case involving the Youth Arts Foundation. Her voice echoed against the marble walls as Richard discreetly maneuvered his cleaning cart around her, keeping his head down. "I don't care what their legal team says, Thomas. The foundation is exploiting these children, and I want those documents by noon." She ended the call with a sharp tap on her screen, her shoulders rigid with tension. Richard had worked at the building for 3 years now, and he'd learned to be invisible to people like Victoria Morgan. At 52, his military posture remained intact despite the janitor's uniform. 22 years in special forces had taught him to observe without being observed, to exist in the periphery of important people's vision. His radio crackled. "Cooper, your daughter's here in the lobby." Richard's heart quickened. Melody wasn't supposed to be here today. Mrs. Abernathy, his elderly neighbor who watched Melody after school, must have had another doctor's appointment. "Be right there," he replied, glancing apologetically at Victoria, who was now reviewing documents with a junior associate. When the elevator doors opened, 8-year-old Melody burst out, her dark curls bouncing around her shoulders, school backpack swinging wildly. "Dad," she called, running toward him with the boundless energy only children possess. "Mrs. Abernathy had to go see her doctor, so Mr. Peterson from Forby brought me here." She looked around the imposing lobby with wide eyes. "Is this where you work? It's so fancy." Richard knelt down, his expression softening in a way it only did for his daughter. "It is. But what did we say about indoor voices?" Melody's eyes found the grand piano. "Dad, look," she whispered dramatically. "A real piano, not just our keyboard at home." Richard saw Victoria glance over at the commotion, her perfectly arched eyebrow rising slightly. "Melody, we can't disturb." But Melody had already slipped from his grasp, drawn to the instrument like a moth to flame. Before Richard could stop her, she had climbed onto the bench and placed her small fingers on the keys. The first note silenced the entire lobby, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat. Major flowed from her fingertips with a precision and emotion that seemed impossible from such small hands. The complex melody filled the space, transforming the cold corporate lobby into a concert hall. Richard stood frozen, watching his daughter play. He'd always known she was talented, had scraped together money for a used keyboard and basic lessons after noticing her natural ability. But this was something else entirely. This was genius. Victoria Morgan had stopped mid-sentence, documents forgotten in her hands. The junior associate beside her stood slack-jawed. Even the security guards at the front desk had turned to stare. When Melody finished the piece, she transitioned seamlessly into an original composition, something hauntingly beautiful that Richard had heard her practicing at home. The melody spoke of longing and hope, of loss and perseverance. Victoria Morgan moved slowly toward the piano, as if pulled by an invisible force. Her usual mask of professional detachment had cracked, revealing genuine wonder. When Melody finally lifted her hands from the keys, the silence felt sacred. "Did you like it?" Melody asked Victoria directly, seemingly unintimidated by the powerful woman before her. Victoria blinked, her hand unconsciously touching her throat where a pulse visibly throbbed. "That was extraordinary," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "Who taught you to play like that?" "My dad started me," Melody said proudly, pointing at Richard. "He says music helps us remember the good things when life gets hard." Victoria's gaze shifted to Richard, seeing him, truly seeing him, for the first time. Her eyes narrowed with sudden interest, like a strategist recalculating a battle plan. "If anyone who taught a child to play like that came to me for legal help," she said slowly, her eyes locked with Richard's, "I would offer my services immediately." Richard felt a chill run through him. Not from Victoria's words, but from the blonde woman who had appeared at the lobby entrance, staring at Melody with an intensity that made his combat instincts flare to life. Elizabeth. After 6 years of absence, Melody's mother was standing 20 feet away, watching their daughter play piano with the calculating, look of someone who had just discovered gold. The Morgan Law Group's 42nd floor conference room offered a panoramic view of the city, but Richard Cooper's attention was fixed on the documents spread before him. His weathered hands, marked with scars from both combat and years of manual labor, looked out of place against the polished mahogany table. She abandoned Melody when she was 2, Richard explained, his voice low and controlled despite the storm raging inside him. No calls, no letters, no child support. Nothing for 6 years. Now she suddenly wants custody? Victoria Morgan studied him from across the table. At 45, she had built one of the city's most formidable law firms through sheer force of will and a tactical mind that could dismantle opposing counsel with surgical precision. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a severe bun, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face. Elizabeth Cooper claims she left due to postpartum depression and needed time to find herself, Victoria said, reading from Elizabeth's filing. She's now a talent coordinator for the Youth Arts Foundation and says she's financially and emotionally stable enough to provide Melody with the opportunities her extraordinary gifts deserve. Richard's jaw tightened. She saw the video, didn't she? 3 days earlier, someone had recorded Melody's impromptu performance in the lobby and posted it online. The video had gone viral overnight. A pint-sized prodigy playing with the soul of someone 5 times her age. Most likely, Victoria agreed. The timing is suspicious. Tell me about your life with Melody. Richard's posture remained military straight, but his eyes softened. After Elizabeth left, it was just us. I was still in special forces. So I requested a transfer to administrative duties. Took a significant pay cut, but Melody needed stability. When I retired 3 years ago, I took the janitor job here for the regular hours. I work nights at a warehouse on weekends and do handyman work when I can pick up extra jobs. He didn't mention the nightmares that still plagued him from his last mission, or how sometimes Melody's music was the only thing that could quiet the ghosts of decisions made in war-torn countries. We have a small apartment in Brooklyn. It's not fancy, but it's home. Melody goes to public school. She's top of her class. I've been teaching her piano on an old keyboard my mother left me. Proper lessons weren't in the budget until recently. Victoria tapped her Mont Blanc pen against her legal pad. And now Elizabeth wants to swoop in and claim the child she abandoned, just as Melody's talent becomes marketable. Richard's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. I can't afford a lengthy legal battle. Which is exactly what Elizabeth is counting on, Victoria said. Her filing mentions your limited financial resources and irregular work hours as reasons why Melody would be better off with her. Richard stared out at the city skyline, remembering nights spent rocking a crying 2-year-old who couldn't understand why her mommy wasn't coming home. I won't lose my daughter. The words hung in the air, a soldier's vow. Victoria studied him, her analytical mind working behind those shrewd green eyes. I'm currently investigating the Youth Arts Foundation, she said finally. They claim to nurture musical talent in underprivileged children, but I have evidence suggesting they're exploiting these children for profit, pushing them into exhausting performance schedules while skimming money from their earnings. She leaned forward. I believe Elizabeth's sudden interest in Melody is connected to the foundation. I'm willing to represent you pro bono, but I need your help with my investigation. Richard's military training had taught him to recognize both tactical opportunities and potential traps. This offer fell somewhere in between. What kind of help? Your observational skills, your ability to access places and gather information without drawing attention. Victoria's expression was pure strategy. As a janitor, you can move through spaces that are off limits to others. Help me build my case against the foundation, and I'll make sure Elizabeth never takes Melody from you. Before Richard could respond, his phone vibrated. The color drained from his face as he read the message. What is it? Victoria asked. A court notice. Elizabeth has filed for emergency temporary custody, claiming I'm actively hindering Melody's artistic development. There's a hearing tomorrow morning. Victoria stood, decision made. Then we don't have much time. I'll represent you at the hearing. Meanwhile, I need you to attend a foundation fundraiser tonight. They've hired your cleaning company for the event. Elizabeth will be there, along with the foundation's director, Jonathan Pierce. She extended her hand across the table. Do we have a deal, Mr. Cooper? Richard hesitated only briefly before shaking her hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. For Melody, he said simply. The Youth Arts Foundation fundraiser glittered with wealth and privilege. Held in the ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel, the event attracted politicians, celebrities, and old money families, all supposedly gathered to support gifted children from disadvantaged backgrounds. Richard moved through the crowd in his janitor's uniform, emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces. The catering staff uniform would have been less conspicuous, but Victoria had insisted on authenticity. His work allowed him to drift from conversation to conversation, unnoticed by guests who looked through service workers as if they were furniture. Remember, Victoria's voice came through the earpiece she'd provided. Our goal is to gather information about Elizabeth's connection to Pierce. Nothing more tonight. Victoria herself circulated among the guests in a midnight blue gown, every inch the successful attorney supporting a worthy cause. No one would suspect she was systematically dismantling the foundation's facade one conversation at a time. Richard spotted Elizabeth across the room, radiant in a silver dress that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Her blonde hair was elegantly styled, and diamonds glittered at her throat, a far cry from the struggling young woman who had walked out on their marriage. She was speaking animatedly to a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, whom Richard recognized from Victoria's briefing as Jonathan Pierce, the foundation's director. "I've found our targets," Richard murmured into his concealed microphone. "Northwest corner, by the ice sculpture." "Can you get closer?" Victoria asked. Richard moved methodically, emptying a nearby trash bin, then kneeling to wipe an imaginary spill from the floor close enough to overhear Elizabeth's conversation. "She's extraordinary, Jonathan," Elizabeth was saying, "far beyond what we typically see even in our most gifted students. With the right guidance, she could be performing at Carnegie Hall within 2 years." Pierce swirled his champagne thoughtfully. "The video was certainly impressive, but her father, your ex-husband, he'll be an obstacle?" Elizabeth's laugh was brittle. "Richard is a simple man with simple dreams. He thinks Melody should have a normal childhood, whatever that means. He can't comprehend the opportunities we could provide." "And you're confident about the custody hearing?" "My lawyer says Richard doesn't stand a chance. Single father, working 3 jobs, no formal musical training himself. Meanwhile, I'm offering Melody access to world-class instructors, performance opportunities, international exposure." Pierce nodded approvingly. "If she's as talented as you say, she could be the face of our new initiative. The board is looking for a prodigy to feature in the European tour this fall." Elizabeth's eyes gleamed. "She's perfect for it. Just wait until you hear her play in person." Richard's pulse quickened as the implications became clear. They were already planning Melody's future, plotting to turn his 8-year-old daughter into their performing monkey. "I've heard enough," he whispered to Victoria. As he turned to leave, his cleaning cart bumped against a waiter, sending a tray of champagne glasses crashing to the floor. Heads turned, including Elizabeth's. Their eyes met across the room. Recognition, then shock, then calculation flickered across her face. "Richard?" she called, moving toward him. "What are you doing here?" Richard straightened to his full height, falling back on the rigid discipline that had carried him through war zones. "Working, Elizabeth. It's what I do." Elizabeth reached him, her perfume, still the same after all these years, bringing back memories he'd fought to suppress. "It's been a long time," she said, her voice softening to the tone that had once made him believe she loved him. "You look good. Military life suited you." "Life." "I'm not in the military anymore," he replied flatly. "I left to raise our daughter after you disappeared." A flash of genuine pain crossed Elizabeth's face. "I was 23, Richard. I wasn't ready for the responsibility. And now you are. Now that Melody's talent has caught someone's attention." Elizabeth's expression hardened. "I've changed. I've built a career, a life. I'm in a position to give Melody everything she deserves. She deserves a parent who loves her for who she is, not what she can do," Richard said, fighting to keep his voice even. "She deserves stability and childhood, not being paraded around Europe as the Foundation's latest trophy." Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly. "You were eavesdropping." "I was doing my job." Richard leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Leave Melody alone, Elizabeth. She's happy. She's thriving. Don't destroy that for your ambition. Before Elizabeth could respond, Jonathan Pierce appeared at her side, eyeing Richard with thinly veiled disdain. Is everything all right, Elizabeth? He asked, his cultured voice carrying an edge of authority. Elizabeth composed herself quickly. Jonathan, this is Richard Cooper, Melody's father. Richard, Jonathan Pierce, director of the Youth Arts Foundation. Pierce extended his hand with practiced cordiality. Mr. Cooper, your daughter has a remarkable gift. Richard accepted the handshake, noting the soft palm and firm grip of a man who wielded power without ever getting his hands dirty. Thank you, I'm very proud of her. You should be, Pierce said. With proper nurturing, she could achieve extraordinary things. Our foundation specializes in children like Melody, exceptional talents who need exceptional opportunities. Melody has everything she needs, Richard replied evenly. Pierce's smile didn't reach his eyes. Does she? A proper piano, for instance? Professional instruction? Performance opportunities with leading orchestras? International exposure? These formative years are crucial for developing prodigious talent. Before Richard could respond, Victoria appeared beside him, sliding her arm through his with practiced familiarity. Richard, there you are, she said warmly, as if they were longtime companions. I've been looking for you. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed at Victoria's arrival. Victoria Morgan, she said, recognition clear in her voice. I didn't expect to see Morgan Law's founder at our humble fundraiser. I support many worthy causes, Victoria replied smoothly. The arts are so important for children's development, don't you agree? She turned to Pierce with a disarming smile. Mr. Pierce, your foundation's work is fascinating. I'd love to learn more about your program for gifted children. Pierce seemed pleased by the attention from such a prominent figure. We identify exceptional talent and provide the resources these children might otherwise lack. Many come from underprivileged backgrounds. Like Richard's daughter, Victoria observed. I heard her play recently. Absolutely mesmerizing. Elizabeth's posture stiffened. You know Melody? I had the privilege of hearing her perform, Victoria said. Richard and I have become quite well acquainted recently. The implication hung in the air, deliberate and effective. Elizabeth's eyes darted between them, reassessing the situation. How interesting, she said finally. Well, we should continue circulating, Jonathan. The Carmichaels wanted to discuss their donation. As they walked away, Richard released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That was close. Victoria's professional mask slipped for a moment, revealing a glimpse of genuine concern. Pierce is planning something big with the Foundation's European tour. We need to find out what it is before the custody hearing. A waiter approached with a tray of champagne. Richard declined, but Victoria took a glass, sipping it thoughtfully. The hearing is at 9 tomorrow, she said. Get some rest, Richard. Tomorrow we fight for your daughter. The family courthouse was a stark contrast to the luxury of the previous night's fundraiser. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating the worn wooden benches where Richard sat beside Victoria, his hands clasped tightly together to hide their trembling. Across the aisle, Elizabeth sat with her attorney, a shark-faced man in an expensive suit. She had traded her glamorous evening wear for a modest blue dress that screamed, responsible mother, her hair pulled back in a sensible ponytail. The transformation infuriated Richard. Elizabeth had always been a chameleon, adapting to whatever role served her best in the moment. Remember, Victoria whispered, let me do the talking. Judge Reynolds has a reputation for being fair but traditional. We need to show that you've provided a stable, loving home despite the challenges. Richard nodded, his throat too tight for words. He hadn't told Melody about the hearing, hadn't wanted to frighten her with the possibility that her life might be upended. She was at school now, blissfully unaware that her future was being decided in this sterile room. All rise for the Honorable Judge Martha Reynolds, the bailiff announced. Judge Reynolds, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, took her seat at the bench, reviewing the documents before her with practiced efficiency. We're here for Cooper versus Cooper, emergency custody petition, she stated. I've reviewed the initial filings. Ms. Green, you're representing the petitioner? Elizabeth's attorney stood. Yes, Your Honor. Alexander Green representing Elizabeth Cooper, the child's biological mother. And for the respondent? Victoria rose, her presence commanding the room despite her opposition's advantage. Victoria Morgan representing Richard Cooper. Your Honor, the child's father and current legal guardian. A flicker of surprise crossed Judge Reynolds' face at the presence of such a high-profile attorney. Very well. Mr. Green, as you've filed the emergency petition, please present your case. Green approached the bench with the confidence of someone accustomed to winning. Your Honor, my client is seeking emergency temporary custody of her 8-year-old daughter, Melody Cooper. As the court documents indicate, Melody has recently been identified as a musical prodigy of exceptional talent. He played a tablet showing the viral video of Melody's performance. This video has garnered over 2 million views in 3 days. Music educators worldwide have commented on the child's extraordinary abilities. Green continued, his voice a practiced blend of concern and reason. Unfortunately, Mr. Cooper, while well-meaning, lacks the resources and expertise to nurture such rare talent. He works multiple jobs with irregular hours, leaving Melody in the care of elderly neighbors. He cannot afford proper musical instruction or a suitable instrument. Richard's hands clenched tighter, knuckles whitening. My client, in contrast, has built a successful career at the prestigious Youth Arts Foundation. She can provide Melody with world-class instructors, performance opportunities, and the structured environment her talent requires. Every day that passes under the current arrangement is a day of squandered potential. Judge Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, Mr. Green. Ms. Morgan? Victoria approached the bench with measured confidence. Your Honor, what we've just heard is a carefully crafted narrative that omits crucial facts. Yes, Melody Cooper is extraordinarily talented, but that talent has flourished under her father's care. The same father who has raised her single-handedly for 6 years after Ms. Elizabeth Cooper abandoned them both. Elizabeth flinched visibly. Mr. Cooper transitioned from active military duty to civilian life specifically to provide stability for his daughter. He maintains regular employment, has created a loving home, and has personally nurtured Melody's musical abilities despite limited resources. Victoria's voice hardened. And now, after 6 years of complete absence, no visits, no calls, no support payments, Ms. Cooper suddenly wants custody, only after discovering her daughter's marketable talent? Objection, Your Honor, Green interjected. Counsel is impugning my client's motives without evidence. I have evidence, Victoria countered, producing a folder. These are records of Ms. Cooper's employment history. She joined the Youth Arts Foundation 3 years ago, but made no attempt to contact her daughter until the viral video appeared. Furthermore, she produced transcripts of Elizabeth's conversation with Pierce from the fundraiser, obtained through Richard's recording. Cooper has already promised the foundation that Melody will participate in their European tour this fall, before she even has custody, before the child has even been consulted. Judge Reynolds reviewed the documents with a deepening frown. Mr. Green, did your client make these arrangements for a child not currently in her custody? Green conferred briefly with Elizabeth before responding. Your Honor, my client was simply exploring opportunities that would be available to Melody. No formal commitments have been made. That directly contradicts these transcripts, Judge Reynolds noted. Victoria pressed her advantage. Your Honor, we're not arguing that Ms. Cooper shouldn't have a relationship with her daughter. Mr. Cooper fully supports Melody knowing her mother. What we oppose is this transparent attempt to gain custody of a child Ms. Cooper has shown no interest in until her talent became commercially viable. Judge Reynolds turned to Richard. Mr. Cooper, do you wish to address the court? Richard stood, steadying himself with a deep breath. Your Honor, I love my daughter more than anything in this world. Every decision I've made since Elizabeth left has been for Melody's well-being. I've worked multiple jobs to keep a roof over our heads. I've sat with her through nightmares and homework struggles and piano practice. His voice grew stronger as he spoke. I don't have much money or fancy connections, but I've given Melody stability, love, and the freedom to develop her talents at her own pace. She's 8 years old. She needs time to be a child, not just a performer. He looked directly at Elizabeth. If Melody chooses music as her path, I'll support her every step of the way. But that should be her choice when she's ready, not a decision forced on her by adults with other agendas. The courtroom fell silent. Even Green seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Judge Reynolds studied Richard for a long moment before speaking. I've heard enough for now. This court takes allegations of exploitation very seriously. I'm ordering a full investigation into the Youth Arts Foundation's practices regarding child performers. She turned to Elizabeth. Miss Cooper, your sudden reappearance in your daughter's life, coinciding precisely with the discovery of her marketable talent, raises serious concerns about your motives. Your Honor, Green began, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. For now, primary custody will remain with Mr. Cooper. Ms. Cooper is granted supervised visitation twice weekly to be overseen by court-appointed personnel. Furthermore, neither party is to make any commitments regarding the child's performance schedule without this court's approval. She fixed Elizabeth with a stern look. Ms. Cooper, if you truly wish to reestablish a relationship with your daughter, I suggest you focus on getting to know her as a person, not as a talent to be developed. Richard's shoulders sagged with relief as the judge continued. We'll reconvene in 30 days for a full custody hearing. By then, I expect the investigation into the foundation to be complete. Court adjourned. The gavel struck with finality. Outside the courthouse, rain began to fall, matching the storm in Elizabeth's eyes as she confronted Richard on the steps. This isn't over, she said, her voice low and dangerous. You're holding her back, Richard. You always held me back, too. Victoria stepped between them. Save it for the next hearing, Ms. Cooper. For now, I suggest you focus on how you'll explain to the court why you've already signed contracts featuring Melody in performances she hasn't agreed to. Elizabeth's composure cracked. You have no idea what you're interfering with. The foundation isn't just about music. What does that mean? Richard demanded. But Elizabeth was already walking away, her attorney hurrying to shield her from the rain with an umbrella. Victoria turned to Richard, concern etching lines around her eyes. That was too easy, she said quietly. Elizabeth backed down too quickly. Something's not right. Richard watched his ex-wife's retreating figure, the military tactician in him recognizing the signs of strategic retreat rather than surrender. She's planning something, he agreed, and it involves Melody. As if summoned by her name, Richard's phone rang. Melody's school calling. His blood turned to ice as he answered. Mr. Cooper, this is Principal Davis. I'm afraid there's been an incident. Melody never returned from music class this morning. We've searched the entire school. She's missing. Richard's world narrowed to a pinpoint of terror as the phone nearly slipped from his suddenly numb fingers. Elizabeth hadn't been fighting in court because she'd already made her move. They've taken my daughter, he said, combat instincts surging through his veins. Elizabeth and the foundation. They've taken Melody. Victoria's face paled. We need to call the police. No. Richard's voice was steel. By the time the police cut through the red tape, Elizabeth could have Melody anywhere. The foundation has resources, connections. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead, but he barely noticed. His mind was already calculating distances, possibilities, vulnerabilities, the way it had in war zones when teammates were captured. I need to find her myself. Victoria gripped his arm. Not alone. I have resources too. My firm has investigators, contacts in law enforcement who can work off the record. Their eyes met, mutual determination forging something stronger than their professional arrangement. What's our first move? Victoria asked, already pulling out her phone. We need to know where they'd take her, Richard said. The foundation has multiple facilities. Elizabeth mentioned a European tour, but they wouldn't leave the country immediately, not with a custody case pending. Victoria was already dialing. Thomas, I need everything we have on the Youth Arts Foundation's properties. Private residences of board members too. And get me GPS tracking on Elizabeth Cooper's phone and credit cards. Richard paced the courthouse steps, mind racing. Melody has her phone with her, the one I gave her for emergencies. If she can turn it on, can you track it? Yes, but only if it's powered up. Elizabeth would know to take it from her. Victoria finished her call. My team is on it. The foundation owns a compound in Connecticut, private, isolated, with rehearsal spaces and housing. It's where they prepare for major tours. Richard was already moving toward the parking garage. That's where they'd take her. It's close enough to the city but secure. How far? About 90 minutes north. I'll drive. Victoria's Audi cut through the rain like a silver bullet. Richard sat rigid in the passenger seat, checking his phone constantly for any signal from Melody's device. "Tell me about Melody," Victoria said, breaking the tense silence. "Not her talent. Tell me about her." Richard glanced over, surprised by the request. But he recognized the strategy. Keep him talking, keep him focused, prevent panic from setting in. "She loves butterflies," he said after a moment. "Has a collection of them pinned in frames on her wall, all ethically sourced. She made me promise. She names them all." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She's stubborn. Gets that from me, I suppose. Once she decides to learn something, she won't stop until she masters it. Not just piano. Last summer, she decided to learn to swim. Practiced every day until she could cross the pool underwater." Victoria nodded, keeping her eyes on the rain-slicked road. "She sounds remarkable." "She is." Richard stared out at the passing landscape. When Elizabeth left, Melody was just learning to talk. For months, she would ask for her mother every night. "Mama come?" That's all she could say. His voice tightened. Eventually, she stopped asking. Victoria's hands gripped the steering wheel more firmly. "We'll find her, Richard." His phone suddenly chimed, a GPS alert. His heart leaped. Melody's phone, it's on and moving. North on I-95. Victoria accelerated, weaving through traffic with precision. "How far ahead?" "About 20 miles. They must be headed to the compound." Richard's training kicked in, calculating angles, timing, potential scenarios. "If we push it, we can intercept them before they reach the property." Victoria pressed harder on the accelerator. "Call your contact at the police. We'll need backup once we find them." Richard dialed, explained the situation to his former military buddy, now working as a detective. "He'll meet us there, but he can't bring a full team without a warrant. We'll mostly be on our own." The rain intensified as they drove north, sheets of water pounding the windshield. Richard watched the GPS signal moving steadily, his daughter's digital heartbeat pulsing on the screen. "We're gaining on them," Victoria said, expertly navigating the treacherous conditions. Suddenly, the signal stopped moving. "They've stopped," Richard announced, "at a service area just off the highway." Victoria took the next exit at dangerous speed. "This might be our only chance to get her before they reach the compound." The service area came into view, a collection of fast food restaurants and gas stations huddled together against the storm. Victoria pulled into the parking lot, scanning for Elizabeth's vehicle. "There," Richard pointed to a black SUV with tinted windows parked at the far end of the lot. Foundation logo on the side. Victoria parked 2 rows away. "What's the plan?" Richard was already reaching for the door. "I go in alone. If they see both of us, they might run. You stay with the car. Be ready to move fast." "Be careful," Victoria said, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal genuine concern. "Remember, we need to do this legally." Richard nodded grimly. "I just want my daughter back." He stepped into the downpour, rain immediately soaking through his clothes as he made his way toward the building. Through the windows, he scanned the interior, families huddled over meals, travelers stretching their legs. And there, at a corner table, was Elizabeth, speaking intently to a man Richard didn't recognize. Beside them, picking listlessly at a plate of fries, sat Melody. Richard's heart clenched. Even from this distance, he could see his daughter's red-rimmed eyes, the slump of her small shoulders. The piano-shaped locket he'd given her for her last birthday glinted under the fluorescent lights. Her fingers kept touching it, a gesture he recognized as her seeking comfort. He took a deep breath, steeling himself, then pushed through the doors. Melody saw him first. Her eyes widened, a flash of hope transforming her tear-stained face. "Daddy!" Elizabeth's head whipped around, shock quickly replaced by anger. The man beside her stood up, placing himself between Richard and the table. "Melody," Richard said, ignoring the others, focusing only on his daughter. "Are you okay?" She nodded, then shook her head, tears welling up again. "Mom said we were going on a special trip, but I told her I wanted to go home. I want to go home, Daddy." Richard moved forward, but the man blocked his path. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Ms. Cooper has legal custody of her daughter now." "That's a lie," Richard said evenly, years of military discipline keeping his rage in check. I have primary custody by court order issued less than an hour ago. What you're doing is kidnapping. Elizabeth stood, her elegant facade cracking. It's not kidnapping when it's her mother. I'm doing what's best for her. By taking her from school without permission? By making her cry? Richard's voice remained controlled, but his eyes burned with a soldier's intensity. Step aside, I'm taking my daughter home. The man, clearly Foundation security, didn't budge. I have instructions from Mr. Pierce to escort Ms. Cooper and her daughter to the retreat. If you have a custody dispute, take it up with the courts. Richard assessed the situation with combat-honed instincts. The man was younger, heavier, probably had formal training, but Richard had experience and motivation on his side. Melody, he said calmly, get your things, please. Elizabeth grabbed Melody's arm. She's not going anywhere with you. That's when Melody did something that surprised them all. She began to tap, her fingers tapping out a complex rhythm on the tabletop, her eyes locked with her father's. It took Richard only seconds to recognize the pattern. It was their secret code developed during his military days for emergencies. Tap patterns that spelled out messages only they understood. Trustyyou, Melody tapped. Then, Momscary. Richard's resolve hardened to diamond. His daughter was asking for rescue, and nothing on earth would stop him from answering that call. Last chance, he said to the security man. Step aside. The man reached inside his jacket, perhaps for a weapon, perhaps for a phone. Richard didn't wait to find out. With precision born from years of close-quarters combat training, he struck. A quick jab to the solar plexus followed by a sweep of the leg that sent the larger man crashing to the floor, gasping for breath. Before Elizabeth could react, Richard had scooped Melody into his arms, her small body clinging to him like a lifeline. Richard, don't do this, Elizabeth hissed, aware of the staring crowd. The Foundation has invested too much. They won't let her go easily. What does that mean? Richard demanded. What have you gotten our daughter into? Elizabeth's eyes darted nervously to the security man struggling to his feet. It's complicated. Pierce has plans for her beyond performances. The European tour is just the beginning. Whatever it is, it's over, Richard said firmly. She's a child, not a commodity. He turned to leave, Melody still in his arms, her face buried against his neck. Cooper! The security man had regained his feet, hand definitely reaching for a weapon now, but he never completed the motion. Victoria Morgan appeared in the doorway, flanked by two uniformed police officers. I believe you were about to commit assault in front of witnesses, she said coldly to the security man. Officers, this man and Ms. Cooper attempted to transport a minor across state lines against court orders and without parental consent. The security man froze, calculating his odds against law enforcement. Elizabeth's face had gone pale. This isn't over, she said to Richard as the officers approached. Pierce won't give up. He never does. Richard held Melody tighter. Neither do I. As they walked out into the rain, Melody still clinging to him like she had as a toddler, Victoria fell into step beside them, sheltering them both with her umbrella. Dad? Melody whispered against his ear. Mom said some scary things in the car, about the Foundation, about me being special but not just for piano. Richard exchanged a look with Victoria over Melody's head. What kind of things, sweetheart? She said Mr. Pierce has a special school for kids like me, that I have sensitivity that's rare, that I'll be part of some experiment that will change everything. Melody's voice trembled. I don't want to be an experiment, Dad. I just want to play piano. Victoria's expression darkened. The Foundation isn't just exploiting these children for performances, she said quietly. They're selecting them for something else, something bigger. Richard carried his daughter to Victoria's car, his mind racing with new questions and deeper concerns. They had recovered Melody, but the danger was clearly far from over. We'll need somewhere safe to stay, he said as Victoria started the engine. Elizabeth knows our apartment. Victoria nodded decisively. My lake house. It's isolated, secure, and not connected to my public records. We'll go there until we figure out what the Foundation is really doing. As they drove away from the service area, Melody finally relaxed her death grip on Richard's neck. You came for me, she said, wonder in her voice. How did you find me? Richard smoothed her tangled curls. I will always find you, Melody. Always. In the driver's seat, Victoria watched the father and daughter in her rearview mirror, something shifting in her expression. For the first time in years, the formidable attorney felt a pang of longing for something beyond case files and courtroom victories. Thank you, Richard said, meeting her eyes in the mirror, for everything. Victoria nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the alliance that had become something more than professional. The real fight is just beginning, she said, turning her attention back to the rain-slicked road. The foundation has resources, influence, and if what Melody overheard is true, they have motives beyond what we initially suspected. Richard's arms tightened protectively around his sleeping daughter. Then we'll fight harder. Together. The word hung between them, a promise and a possibility, as they drove deeper into the storm, away from one danger and toward an uncertain future. Victoria Morgan's lake house seemed to materialize from the mist like something from another world. Nestled among towering pines on the shore of a secluded lake, the modern structure of glass and stone offered both sanctuary and strategic advantage, visibility in all directions, limited approach routes, and a boat dock for emergency escape. Richard Cooper assessed these details automatically, his military training never truly dormant. He carried the sleeping Melody from Victoria's Audi, his daughter's weight familiar and precious in his arms. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a silver sheen on every surface and the clean, sharp scent of pine. Security system is top of the line, Victoria said quietly as she unlocked the front door. Motion sensors, cameras, direct line to a private security firm. No one approaches without us knowing. Richard nodded appreciatively. Good sight lines, too. Defensive position. A ghost of a smile touched Victoria's lips. I didn't design it with a siege in mind, but I suppose old habits die hard for both of us. Inside, the house was surprisingly warm, not the sterile showcase Richard had expected from someone of Victoria's status. Comfortable furniture in earth tones, shelves lined with actual books that showed signs of being read, photographs of landscapes rather than awards or celebrities. Guest rooms are upstairs, Victoria said, leading the way. The blue room has 2 beds. I thought Melody might feel better having you nearby tonight. The consideration surprised him. Thank you. The blue room was cozy with windows overlooking the lake and a small balcony. Richard gently laid Melody on one of the beds, carefully removing her shoes but otherwise leaving her fully clothed. She stirred briefly, mumbling something about music before sinking back into exhausted sleep. For a moment, Richard simply watched her breathe, the tight knot in his chest finally beginning to loosen. He brushed a strand of dark hair from her forehead, allowing himself a second of pure relief before the questions and uncertainties crowded back in. When he returned downstairs, Victoria had shed her formal courtroom attire for jeans and a cashmere sweater, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger, less formidable, yet somehow more authentic. She handed him a tumbler of amber liquid. Single malt. You look like you could use it. Richard accepted the glass gratefully. Rough day at the office. The attempt at humor fell flat, but Victoria acknowledged it with a slight nod. She gestured toward the living room, where a fire was already crackling in the stone fireplace. We should talk strategy, she said, settling into one corner of the sofa. The foundation won't stop with one failed attempt. Richard took the armchair opposite, savoring the burn of the whiskey. First, I need to understand what we're really dealing with. Melody said Elizabeth mentioned experiments, something about sensitivity that's rare. Victoria leaned forward, her professional focus returning. I've been investigating the foundation for nearly a year. Initially, and it was just financial, evidence they were skimming money from children's earnings, pushing them into exploitative contracts. Standard awful corporate behavior. She took a sip of her own drink. But about 3 months ago, one of my sources found something strange. The foundation has a separate research division that isn't mentioned in any of their public materials. Heavy funding, top-level security clearance required. Research into what? That's what I couldn't figure out. The documents my source provided mentioned something called Project Resonance and referred to heightened neural response to harmonic stimuli in gifted children. Richard's brow furrowed. In English? They're studying how musically gifted children's brains respond differently to sound patterns. But why keep it secret? Why the aggressive recruitment of specific children? It doesn't add up. Richard thought of Melody's extraordinary talent, how she could hear a piece once and play it back perfectly, how she composed music that seemed beyond her years. So they're not just after performances. They want the children themselves for research. It appears so, and they're willing to break laws to get them. The implications chilled him more than the kidnapping attempt. We need more information. Victoria nodded. My team is working on it. Meanwhile, I've filed emergency motions to freeze the Foundation's assets pending investigation and to get a restraining order against Elizabeth. Richard stared into the fire. The tactical part of his brain saw and already mapping out worst-case scenarios and contingency plans. She said something else at the service station about Pierce having invested too much, like Melody was some kind of asset. Victoria's phone chimed with an incoming message. She glanced at it, her expression darkening. My investigator found something. The Foundation has been buying properties around the world, isolated compounds like the one in Connecticut, all staffed with unusual combinations of personnel, music teachers alongside neurologists and military consultants. Military? Richard straightened, alarm bells ringing in his head. What kind? Former psychological operations specialists primarily, experts in sound-based influence techniques. The pieces started clicking together in Richard's mind, an ugly picture forming. They're weaponizing music, or trying to. Victoria looked skeptical. That sounds like science fiction. Not entirely. Richard set down his glass, memories of classified briefings surfacing. During my last years in Special Forces, there were rumors about research into using specific sound frequencies to affect human behavior. Crowd control, enhanced interrogation, even psychological manipulation. Most of it was theoretical, considered too ethically problematic to pursue. And you think the Foundation has continued this research? Using gifted children? Children whose brains are uniquely responsive to musical patterns, who can both create and interpret complex harmonics. Richard felt sick at the thought. Melody doesn't just play music. She feels it. She describes sounds in terms of colors and emotions. She can identify any note instantly. Perfect pitch, Victoria supplied. More than that, sometimes she knows what I'm thinking just from the rhythm of my footsteps. She says everyone has their own song. Richard ran a hand through his hair. I thought it was just a child's imagination. But what if it's not? What if these kids are some kind of sound empaths? Victoria was silent for a long moment, processing. If you're right, this goes beyond exploitation. This is about power, control, and people with power and control issues rarely give up easily. Which means Elizabeth was right about one thing. This isn't over. Richard stood, military instincts demanding action. We need to secure this location, establish watch rotations, identify evacuation routes. Victoria rose as well. I'll contact my security firm, have them increase patrols, and I'll push my investigative team for more concrete evidence of what Project Resonance really is. As they moved through the house, checking locks and sightlines, Richard was struck by how naturally they fell into complementary roles. His tactical assessment paired with her strategic planning, his hands-on approach balanced by her systematic thinking. You're good at this, he observed as she programmed the security system. Most civilians panic in crisis situations. Victoria's fingers moved deftly across the keypad. I grew up with a military father who treated home security like a religion, and I've faced enough corporate raiders and hostile witnesses to know that composure is its own kind of power. She finished the security sequence and turned to face him. In the dim light of the entryway, with her guards slightly lowered, Victoria looked both stronger and more vulnerable than she had in her courtroom armor. What's our timeline? Richard asked, professional focus keeping him anchored. The emergency motions will be heard tomorrow morning. Without Elizabeth or the Foundation present, we have a good chance of getting everything we've requested. That buys us time. Richard nodded. I'll take first watch. You should rest. Victoria checked her watch. Nearly midnight. Wake me in 4 hours. We'll rotate. You don't have to. I'm part of this now, she interrupted firmly. We're partners until Melody is safe. That means equal responsibility. The word partners lingered between them, carrying weight beyond their professional arrangement. Richard recognized the shift. They were no longer lawyer and client, no longer even reluctant allies. They were something more. 4 hours, he agreed. There's coffee in the kitchen? Fully stocked. Help yourself. Victoria hesitated, then added, and Richard, we're going to win this, not just the legal battle, all of it. Her certainty was like gravity, a force that made standing taller feel natural. Yes, ma'am. As Victoria disappeared upstairs, Richard began a methodical patrol of the perimeter, checking windows and doors, memorizing the terrain around the house. The lake reflected moonlight now, a silver mirror stretching into darkness. Beautiful but exposed. They would need to keep away from the windows on that side. In the kitchen, he found an expensive coffee machine that required engineering skills to operate. After some trial and error, he produced something drinkable and carried it to the front room, positioning himself where he could watch both the approach to the house and the stairs leading to Melody. The quiet hum of the lake house settled around him, so different from Brooklyn's constant urban soundtrack. He wondered if Melody would like it here. The clean air, the space, the natural beauty. She would probably compose something inspired by the rhythmic lapping of water against the shore. His phone vibrated, a text from his police contact. Records show Foundation has private helicopter. Flight plan filed for tomorrow, Hartford to Boston. Passenger manifest includes E. Cooper. Richard frowned. Boston was less than an hour's flight from here. Could be coincidence, but his instincts screamed otherwise. He forwarded the information to Victoria with a note. They're getting closer, might know our location. He returned to his patrol, senses heightened. Every shadow seemed to hold potential threats, every distant sound requiring analysis. This hypervigilance was familiar, the same state that had kept him alive in war zones. But now it was focused on protecting something infinitely more precious than his own life. Around 3 a.m., a sound from upstairs broke his concentration. Melody's voice, distressed. He took the stairs 2 at a time, entering the blue room to find his daughter sitting bolt upright in bed, eyes wide but unfocused. They're coming, she whispered, her voice eerily adult. I can hear them planning. Richard sat beside her, taking her small hands in his. Melody, you're dreaming. You're safe. She shook her head violently. Not dreaming, listening. Mom and Mr. Pierce, they're talking about me, about my brain waves during music, about how I can hear things others can't. A chill ran down Richard's spine. What things, sweetheart? Patterns, not just in music, in everything. Her fingers twitched, playing invisible keys. They said I'm the strongest they've found, that I can help them build something called a harmonic architecture that changes how people think. Richard kept his voice calm despite the alarm bells clanging in his mind. When did you hear this? Today in the car. They didn't know I was listening. Melody's eyes finally focused on him. Dad, they said they need my brain patterns. That's why they want me so badly. Victoria appeared in the doorway, alerted by the voices. She wore silk pajamas and a concerned expression. Everything okay? Richard met her eyes over Melody's head, a silent communication passing between them. This is worse than we thought. Just a bad dream, he said aloud for Melody's benefit. Right, sweetheart? Melody looked between them, her perception far too acute. You're afraid, she said simply. Both of you. Victoria moved into the room, sitting on Melody's other side. Without awkwardness or hesitation, she took the child's free hand. Smart people get afraid sometimes, she said, but smart people also make plans. Your dad and I are making plans to keep you safe. Melody seemed to consider this. Like a mission? Like Dad used to do? Richard nodded. Exactly like that. And the first rule of any mission is that team members need rest. Think you can go back to sleep? Will you stay? Melody's voice was small again, childlike. I'll be right here, Richard promised. He caught Victoria's eye. We both will. They settled on either side of Melody, a protective barrier of adults around the small girl. Richard expected Victoria to feel awkward in this improvised family tableau, but she seemed completely at ease, humming softly until Melody's breathing deepened into sleep. She's extraordinary, Victoria whispered across the sleeping child, and not just musically. Richard nodded, a complex mixture of pride and fear churning inside him. She's always known things she shouldn't be able to know, felt things more deeply than other kids. You believe what she said about hearing Elizabeth and Pierce? I believe she heard something. Richard watched his daughter's peaceful face. Whether it was exactly as she described or filtered through an 8-year-old's understanding, I don't know, but the Foundation's interest in her is clearly about more than performances. Victoria's expression hardened with resolve. Then we need to shut them down completely. Not just stop this attempt, but end their entire operation. Agreed, but how? Organizations like that have layers of precision: legal, financial, political. Leave the legal and financial to me, Victoria said, a predatory gleam in her eye. I didn't build Morgan Law by playing nice with corrupt power brokers. Richard recognized that look, the same expression he'd seen on the faces of elite soldiers before a high-stakes mission. You really enjoy taking down the bad guys, don't you? A smile curved Victoria's lips. Almost as much as you do, I suspect. The moment stretched between them, a recognition of kindred spirits despite their different worlds. Then Victoria's phone buzzed softly. She checked it, frowning. What is it? Richard asked. My investigator found something in Elizabeth's background check that doesn't make sense. According to these records, she's Jonathan Pierce's niece. Richard stared. That's impossible. I knew her family. She never mentioned any uncle in the music industry. The relationship may be hidden deliberately. It would explain why Pierce is so invested in getting Melody specifically. Victoria's mind was visibly racing. We need to look deeper into both their backgrounds. By morning, Melody seemed to have forgotten her nighttime revelation, chattering excitedly about the lake and asking if she could go outside. Victoria produced pancake ingredients from a well-stocked pantry, and the three of them shared a surprisingly domestic breakfast. Richard watched as Victoria helped Melody measure flour, impressed by how naturally the hard-edged attorney interacted with his daughter. For her part, Melody had clearly decided Victoria was a friend, asking endless questions about the lake house and whether there were fish in the water. We'll check after breakfast, Victoria promised, but we need to stay close to the house, okay? Melody nodded solemnly, because of Mom and the Foundation people. Richard and Victoria exchanged glances. There was no point denying the situation to a child who had already been kidnapped. Yes, Richard said, honestly. We're keeping you safe until we can make sure they won't try to take you again. Melody absorbed this with the resilience of childhood. Can I play the piano today? It helps me think. Victoria looked apologetic. I don't have a piano here, but... She disappeared into another room, returning with a portable keyboard. Will this work for now? Melody's eyes lit up. Yes, thank you, Ms. Morgan. Victoria, she corrected gently. Ms. Morgan is for courtrooms. After breakfast, Victoria withdrew to her home office for a video conference with the judge regarding their emergency motions. Richard took Melody outside, staying within the property's boundaries, but allowing her to explore the lakeshore under his watchful eye. The morning was crisp and clear, sunlight sparkling on the water. Melody collected interesting stones and pine cones, arranging them in patterns that only made sense to her. Richard kept one eye on his daughter and the other on their surroundings, alert for any sign of intrusion. Victoria joined them an hour later, her expression a mixture of triumph and concern. The judge granted our motions, she reported. The Foundation's assets are temporarily frozen, and Elizabeth is legally barred from coming within 500 feet of Melody. That's good news, Richard said, noting her hesitation. What's the bad news? Pierce's lawyers are already fighting back. Hard. They've filed multiple countersuits, including one claiming you're unfit to parent due to PTSD from your military service. Richard's jaw tightened. How would they know about that? They've been investigating you, just as we've been investigating them. They have medical records, Richard, records that should have been confidential. The implications were clear. The Foundation had serious reach, access to restricted information. Richard unconsciously positioned himself between Melody and the trees surrounding the property. There's more, Victoria continued, lowering her voice. The judge mentioned receiving calls from influential parties suggesting this case has national security implications and should be handled discreetly. National security? Richard echoed. They're really playing that card? It means they have government connections, possibly funding. Victoria's expression was grim. This just got significantly more complicated. Melody appeared beside them, clutching a particularly interesting rock. Dad, look, it has music inside. Richard knelt to examine her find, an ordinary-looking stone with quartz veins running through it. Music? When you tap it just right, it makes patterns. Melody demonstrated, tapping the stone with another rock in a complex rhythm. Hear that? It's a G minor progression. Richard heard only random tapping, but nodded anyway. Very nice. Victoria watched the interaction with sudden intensity. Melody, can you hear patterns in other things too? Not just music? Melody considered the question seriously. All the time. People's voices have patterns. So do cars and trains and the way trees move in the wind. She looked up at them with earnest eyes. Doesn't everyone hear them? Not like you do, Victoria said gently. Your dad says you can tell what people are thinking sometimes. Just from sounds. Is that true? Melody nodded. Like when Dad is worried but trying to hide it, his footsteps change. They get more, deliberate. And when you're thinking really hard, your breathing has a different pattern. Victoria's eyebrows rose. And can you tell what I'm thinking now? Melody studied her for a moment. You're scared for us, but also curious about me. She tilted her head. And something else about Dad, but it's all mixed together with the worry, so it's hard to separate. Richard watched Victoria's cheeks color slightly. Interesting. That's very perceptive, Victoria said, recovering quickly. Can I ask you something else, Melody? When your mom took you yesterday, did you hear her talking about these patterns? Melody's expression clouded. She and Mr. Pierce said I have auditory cognitive synesthesia and something about heightened mirror neuron response to harmonic stimuli. They said it makes me special. Her voice dropped. They want to scan my brain while I play different kinds of music, to see how it affects the patterns. Richard exchanged a loaded glance with Victoria. Hearing those technical terms from his 8-year-old's mouth confirmed their worst suspicions. Melody, Victoria said carefully, did they say why they want to study these patterns? The little girl's eyes darted nervously between them. They said some patterns can make people do things, feel things, like how certain music makes you feel happy or sad, but stronger, much stronger. She chewed her lip. Mr. Pierce said I could help them create patterns that would make bad people stop fighting, but it didn't feel right when he said it. Trust that feeling, Richard said firmly. You have good instincts. Victoria's phone rang, her investigator calling. She answered, listened intently, then ended the call with a terse, keep digging. What is it? Richard asked. Pierce isn't just the Foundation's director. He's former military intelligence, specialized in psychological operations. And the Foundation isn't privately funded, as they claim. They receive grants through shell companies linked to defense contractors. The pieces clicked together with chilling clarity. They're developing sound-based psychological manipulation tools, using gifted children to do it. Exactly. And according to my source, they've been using the European tour as cover for meeting with foreign military officials, selling the technology, or at least its potential. Richard felt sick. And Elizabeth is helping them? It appears so, though whether she fully understands what she's involved in is unclear. Melody tugged at Richard's hand. Dad, can I go play the keyboard now? I need to work something out. Richard recognized the look, the same expression she got when composing. Of course, sweetheart. Stay inside where we can see you. As Melody ran back toward the house, Victoria moved closer to Richard, her voice dropping. We need to document everything she's told us. If we can prove the Foundation is using children for classified research without proper protocols or consent, we can bring in higher authorities. Higher than the people already backing them? There are still ethical watchdogs with teeth, even in Washington. I have contacts. Richard nodded, tactical planning taking over. We should move locations soon. If they have the resources you described, they can find this place eventually. Agreed, I said. I have another property, more remote than this one. We can leave tonight. As they walked back to the house, Richard's senses remained on high alert. The peaceful setting now seemed full of potential dangers. Too many angles of approach, too many blind spots. They needed a more defensible position. Inside, Melody was hunched over the keyboard, playing something complex and dissonant, her small face set in concentration. The melody was unlike anything Richard had heard from her before. Darker, more challenging, with strange harmonies that seemed almost disturbing. That's intense, Victoria observed quietly. It's how I feel about the foundation, Melody said without looking up, her fingers continuing to move across the keys. I'm putting the scary parts into music so they don't stay inside my head. Richard's heart swelled with pride and sorrow. Even now, his daughter was using music to process trauma, to transform fear into art. He wanted to wrap her in his arms and promise nothing would ever hurt her again, but he knew better than to make promises he might not be able to keep. Instead, he said, "That's very brave, Melody." She looked up finally, her eyes too old for her face. "Are we in very big trouble, Dad?" Richard knelt beside the keyboard. "We're facing a challenge. But you know what? I was a soldier for a long time, and I never lost a single member of my team on a mission. Not once. Because you protected them," Melody said, "like you're protecting me." "Exactly. And now I have Victoria helping too. That makes us even stronger." Victoria joined them, placing a hand on Melody's shoulder. "Your dad is right, and I never lose in court. Never." Melody seemed to consider this, then nodded. "Okay, I believe you." She returned to her playing, the melody shifting to something more resolved, still complex but less chaotic. Richard and Victoria retreated to the kitchen to continue their planning, speaking in low voices. "We leave at dusk," Victoria decided. "Less visibility. My other property is about 3 hours north, completely off-grid. Solar power, satellite communications only." Richard approved of the tactical choice. "I'll pack what we need, travel light, fast movement. Already arranged for my investigator to meet us there tomorrow with everything he's found. He's former FBI, completely trustworthy." As they worked out the details of their evacuation plan, Richard was struck again by Victoria's competence. She didn't panic or hesitate, didn't need things explained twice, and seemed to anticipate potential problems before they arose. In another life, she would have made an excellent military officer. "You're staring," Victoria noted, without looking up from the map she was studying. "Just appreciating good planning when I see it." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "I could say the same. Not many civilians would be this organized in a crisis." "I'm not a civilian," Richard corrected automatically. Victoria did look up then. "No, you're not. Not really." She studied him with those perceptive green eyes. "Does it ever go away? The military mindset?" "No." Richard didn't have to think about the answer. You can leave the service, but it never leaves you, especially special forces. The training, the perspectives, the constant threat assessment, it becomes who you are. "Is that why you've never—" Victoria hesitated. "Never what?" "Remarried, built a new life beyond you and Melody." The question caught him off guard. "Partly, the job wasn't exactly conducive to relationships. And after Elizabeth left," he shrugged. "Trust doesn't come easily anymore." Victoria nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I know something about that. In my world, people are usually after something: influence, connections, status. Real relationships are rare." Their eyes held for a moment, mutual recognition of shared isolation despite their different paths. The moment was broken by the security system's discreet chime. Motion sensors activated at the perimeter of the property. Richard was instantly alert. "Stay with Melody. Lock yourselves in the office. It has the strongest door." Victoria was already moving, her body language shifting from casual to focused in seconds. "There are weapons in the gun safe. Combination is 4927. Richard nodded, impressed again by her preparedness. He moved silently to the front windows, staying hidden behind curtains as he surveyed the approach to the house. A black SUV had pulled up at the edge of the property line. 2 men in suits emerged, followed by Elizabeth. Even from this distance, Richard could see the tension in her posture. "Foundation security," he muttered. "And Elizabeth." Victoria appeared at his side, having secured Melody in the office. "How did they find us?" "Doesn't matter now. They're here." Richard calculated options rapidly. Confrontation or evasion? Victoria's eyes narrowed as she assessed the threat. They don't have a warrant or legal standing to enter the property. Confrontation, but on our terms. Let them come to us. Richard moved to the gun safe, quickly entering the combination. Inside was an impressive collection, not just for home defense, but serious weapons. He selected a 9mm handgun, checking it with practiced efficiency. Military father taught you well, he observed. He believed in being prepared. Victoria took a shotgun for herself, handling it with obvious familiarity. Back door is our emergency exit. Car is packed and ready. Richard raised an eyebrow. You did that while I was outside with Melody? Like you said, good planning. There was no smugness in her tone, just a professional confidence. They positioned themselves strategically. Richard near the front entrance, Victoria covering the side approach. Through the windows, they could see Elizabeth and her companions approaching the house. Remember, they have no legal right to be here or to take Melody, Victoria said. We have court orders on our side. Richard nodded grimly. People like that don't always respect court orders. The doorbell rang, a civilized gesture that seemed absurdly normal given the circumstances. Richard opened the door, but remained blocking the entrance, his weapon visible but not pointed directly at the visitors. Elizabeth, you're violating a restraining order. Elizabeth looked exhausted, her perfectly maintained appearance showing cracks. Hair less immaculate, eyes shadowed with fatigue. Richard, please, this has gone too far. I just want to talk. With armed escorts? Richard nodded toward the two men flanking her. Security precautions. You did assault our personnel yesterday. Richard didn't bother denying it. State your business and leave. You're not coming inside, and you're certainly not seeing Melody. Elizabeth's facade cracked further. You don't understand what you're interfering with. Pierce is furious. He's calling in favors from people who can make your life very difficult. Threats now? That's your approach? Not threats, reality. Elizabeth glanced nervously at her companions. Richard, the foundation isn't just a music program. The work they're doing has significant implications, national security implications. Victoria appeared beside Richard. If that's true, then they should be operating through proper channels, with appropriate oversight and ethical protocols, not kidnapping children. Elizabeth flinched at the word kidnapping. It wasn't, I wouldn't have hurt her. You terrified her, Richard said flatly. You took her against her will. That's harm, Elizabeth. For a moment, genuine remorse flickered across Elizabeth's face. Then one of the security men stepped forward, his hand moving inside his jacket. Mr. Cooper? Ms. Morgan? We have documentation you should see. Authorization from parties you don't want to antagonize. Victoria's shotgun rose slightly. Remove your hands slowly, sir. Any document you have can be sent through proper legal channels. The man hesitated, assessing the situation. Richard recognized the look, calculating odds, weighing risks versus rewards, military or law enforcement background. Definitely. We're authorized to offer financial compensation, the man said finally. Very generous compensation in exchange for Melody's participation in a supervised research program. You're trying to buy my daughter? Richard's voice was dangerously quiet. Compensate for her valuable contribution, the man corrected smoothly. Many families would be grateful for such an opportunity. Full college fund, housing allowance, health care, all guaranteed. Victoria's laugh was cold. You really don't understand who you're dealing with, do you? Mr. Cooper didn't give up his military career and work 3 jobs for 6 years so he could sell his daughter to the highest bidder. Elizabeth stepped forward again. Richard, please, just let me see her. Talk to her. She's my daughter, too. You forfeited that right when you walked out 6 years ago, Richard said, and destroyed any chance of rebuilding it when you tried to kidnap her yesterday. I made mistakes, Elizabeth admitted, genuine emotion breaking through. But Melody is special. What she can do, it's more important than any of us realize. Before Richard could respond, a sound from behind them made all 3 visitors freeze. Melody had emerged from the office and was playing the keyboard again, but this time the melody was strange, almost hypnotic. Complex patterns that seemed to shift and pulse in the air. The security men exchanged alarmed glances. One reached for his radio. Sir, the subject is demonstrating the capabilities now. Auditory pattern RN7 unassisted. Elizabeth's eyes widened. She's never done that before. Done what? Richard demanded, but he could feel it too. Something about the music was affecting him physically. A strange pressure behind his eyes. A subtle disorientation. Victoria steadied herself against the doorframe. What is she playing? The second security man was already backing toward the SUV. We need to report this immediately. The project parameters may need adjustment. Elizabeth remained frozen, staring past Richard toward the sound of Melody's playing. She's creating a deterrent pattern, she whispered. Self-taught. Pierce said it might be possible theoretically, but the melody shifted again, growing more intense. Richard felt his grip on the weapon loosening involuntarily, a wave of dizziness washing over him. Melody, he called, fighting through the disorientation. Sweetheart, stop playing. The music ceased abruptly. The pressure in Richard's head vanished, leaving behind a faint ringing in his ears. Elizabeth looked shaken. Do you understand now? Do you see why the Foundation needs her? What she just did, affecting the nervous system through sound alone? It shouldn't be possible. Richard turned to see Melody standing in the hallway, her small face wet in determination. They were going to take me again, she said simply. I could hear them thinking it. Victoria steadied herself, shotgun still trained on the visitors. I suggest you leave. Now, before we contact the authorities about this trespassing. The security men had already retreated to the SUV, speaking urgently into their radios. Elizabeth lingered, conflict evident on her face. Richard, she said quietly, Pierce won't stop. What Melody just did, it only confirms how valuable she is to the project. He has government backing, military contracts. They'll come with more men next time, maybe with official orders. Let them come, Richard said, his resolve hardening to steel. I've faced worse odds. Elizabeth shook her head sadly. Always the soldier. She turned to go, then looked back one last time. For what it's worth, I really do love her. In my way. Love isn't possession, Richard replied. It's protection. Remember that. As Elizabeth walked back to the SUV, Victoria closed and locked the door, immediately activating additional security measures. We need to leave. Now, she said. If what just happened is any indication, they'll be back with reinforcements quickly. Richard was already moving toward Melody, kneeling to check her. Are you okay, sweetheart? That music you played? Melody seemed tired but alert. I heard them planning to take me, so I made a pattern that would make them dizzy and confused. I've been working on it all morning. Victoria and Richard exchanged alarmed glances over her head. You created that deliberately? Victoria asked carefully. To affect them physically? Melody nodded. The Foundation people have been trying to make patterns like that, but they can't get them right. I can hear how they should go. She looked up at her father, suddenly worried. Did I do something bad? Richard pulled her into a tight hug. So, no, sweetheart. You protected yourself. That's never bad. But internally, he was reeling from the implications. If Melody could intuitively create sound patterns that affected human physiology, without training, without equipment, no wonder the Foundation wanted her so desperately. Car. Now, Victoria said tersely, already gathering their essential items. They'll be back with a larger team within the hour. As they loaded into Victoria's SUV, a different one than they had arrived in, Richard noted with approval, Melody's earlier composure began to crack. Dad? She said in a small voice from the back seat. Mom looked sad and scared. Richard buckled her in securely. She's involved in something complicated, Melody, something she doesn't fully control anymore. Is she a bad person now? The question was heartbreaking in its simplicity. Richard struggled to find the right answer. I think she's made bad choices, but that doesn't make her all bad. People are more complicated than that. Victoria started the engine, her profile tense as she scanned the road ahead. We'll take back roads, stay off the main highways where cameras might spot us. As they pulled away from the lake house, Richard kept one eye on the rear-view mirror, watching for pursuit. In the back seat, Melody had fallen uncharacteristically silent, her small fingers tapping complex rhythms on her knees. What you did back there, Victoria said after several minutes of tense silence. With the music. Have you always been able to do that? Melody shook her head. I just figured it out today. When I was playing with the sounds in my head, I could feel how different patterns make people feel different things. Some make you sleepy, some make you dizzy, some make it hard to think straight. And you can create these patterns just by hearing them in your mind? Victoria pressed. Uh-huh. It's like recipes for feelings. Melody looked worried again. Is that why the foundation wants me? Because I can make those recipes? Richard turned in his seat to face his daughter. I think so, sweetheart. But what they want to use your gift for isn't right. They want to control people, make them feel things or do things without choosing. Melody considered this with 8-year-old seriousness. Like mind control, like in the sci-fi movies? Something like that. Not as dramatic maybe, but similar idea. That's wrong, Melody said firmly. Music should make people feel things because they want to feel them, not because they're forced to. Victoria smiled slightly in the driver's seat. Smart kid you've got there, Cooper. Gets it from her mother, Richard said automatically, then winced at his own words. Melody caught it immediately. You said something nice about Mom. Richard sighed. Despite everything, your mother is intelligent, Melody, and determined. Those are good qualities when used the right way. Victoria glanced at him briefly, something like respect in her eyes. Even now, he wasn't poisoning his daughter against her mother. That took integrity. They drove in silence for several miles, the scenery gradually changing from lakeside homes to deeper forest. Victoria handled the powerful vehicle with confidence, taking unmarked roads that didn't appear on standard maps. Richard's phone buzzed with a text from his police contact. Alert circulating in federal channels about Cooper case. Child described as asset of national interest. Orders to report sightings but not engage. Something big happening here. He showed the message to Victoria, whose grip tightened on the steering wheel. They're escalating quickly, she said. We need to reach my property before they establish roadblocks. Richard texted back, need to go dark. We'll contact when safe. As he powered down his phone, Victoria reached for the glove compartment, extracting what looked like ordinary smartphones. Burner phones, she explained, handing one to Richard. Untraceable. We'll use these from now on. Richard raised an eyebrow. You keep burner phones in your vacation home? Victoria's mouth quirked in a half smile. Like I said, military father. Paranoia is a family tradition. In the back seat, Melody had begun humming softly to herself, a different melody than before, something soothing and gentle. Richard felt the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Melody, he said carefully, is that music affecting us right now? She nodded without stopping. Just a little, to help everyone be calmer. It doesn't make you do anything, just helps feelings that are already there. Victoria caught Richard's eye in the rearview mirror, a silent communication passing between them. This is both amazing and terrifying. As the SUV climbed higher into the mountains, leaving civilization further behind, Richard felt the tactical part of his brain settling into mission mode. The parameters were clear now. Protect Melody from a well-resourced adversary with potential government backing. Create distance, establish a secure position, gather intelligence, plan countermeasures. What wasn't clear was the endgame. How long could they run? What kind of life would this be for Melody? And if the Foundation truly had the connections Elizabeth claimed, how could they possibly win against such odds? Victoria seemed to read his thoughts. We're not running forever, she said quietly. We're gathering evidence to expose them. Once we prove what they're doing, even their government connections won't save them. Richard nodded, grateful for her strategic thinking. We make our stand on our terms, not theirs. Exactly. As darkness fell, the road narrowed further, becoming little more than a forest track. Victoria navigated with the confidence of familiarity, eventually turning onto an almost invisible path that wound upward through dense trees. Almost there, she announced. Property has its own generator, well water, stored supplies. We can hold out for weeks if necessary. The cabin that emerged from the darkness was not what Richard expected. Rather than a rustic structure, it was a modern fortress disguised as a mountain retreat. Reinforced walls, limited windows, positioned for maximum defensive advantage on a ridge overlooking the surrounding forest. My father designed it, Victoria explained as she parked in a concealed garage built into the hillside. He called it his last redoubt. I always thought he was excessive until now. As they unloaded their minimal belongings, Richard conducted a quick perimeter assessment. The property was nearly perfect from a tactical perspective. Clear sight lines, limited approach routes, good cover, multiple exit options. Whatever Victoria's father had feared, he'd prepared for it thoroughly. Inside, the cabin was comfortable but utilitarian. Solar-powered lights illuminated a great room with kitchen and living areas, while bedrooms branched off a central hallway. One room had clearly been designed as a communications center, with multiple screens and satellite equipment. We can monitor news, access secure networks, and communicate without being traced, Victoria explained. And there's a panic room behind the fireplace wall if things get really dire. Melody explored the space with childlike curiosity, her earlier distress seemingly forgotten. "It's like a secret agent house," she declared, climbing onto a stool at the kitchen counter. "Are we secret agents now, Dad?" Richard smiled despite the gravity of their situation. "Something like that." As Victoria prepared a simple meal from the well-stocked pantry, Richard established security protocols, check-in procedures, watch rotations, emergency signals. They worked seamlessly together, anticipating each other's needs without discussion. Later, after Melody had fallen asleep in one of the bedrooms, Richard and Victoria sat before the fireplace, planning their next moves. "My investigator will be here tomorrow morning with everything he's found," Victoria said. "Meanwhile, I've sent secure messages to contacts at the Justice Department, people who won't be intimidated by vague national security claims." Richard nodded, staring into the flames. "We need to understand exactly what Project Resonance is, what they're planning to do with these sound patterns Melody can create." Victoria sipped her wine thoughtfully. "Based on what we've seen and what Elizabeth said, they're developing some kind of auditory influence technology, using gifted children like Melody to create sound patterns that affect human physiology and potentially behavior." "Mind control through music," Richard said grimly. "It sounds like science fiction." "Most weapons do, until they're deployed." Victoria set down her glass. "If they've truly found a way to influence behavior through specific sound patterns, the applications would be endless. Crowd control, enhanced interrogation, mass persuasion. And Melody can intuitively create these patterns. No wonder they're so desperate to get her back." Richard ran a hand through his hair. "But there's something we're still missing. Elizabeth mentioned Pierce being furious, calling in favors. This feels personal for him beyond just the project." Victoria nodded slowly. "My investigator mentioned something similar. Pierce has invested unusual personal resources in Project Resonance, beyond institutional funding. And there's still the question of his possible relationship to Elizabeth." They fell silent, each following their own thoughts. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across the room. Outside, the wind had picked up, a melancholy whistle through the trees. "What happens after?" Richard asked suddenly. "If we succeed in exposing the foundation, shutting down Project Resonance, what then?" Victoria looked surprised by the question. "Melody goes back to being a normal kid, with extraordinary musical talent, but free to choose her own path. And us?" The question slipped out before Richard could reconsider it. Victoria's gaze met his, steady and unguarded. "I don't know," she admitted. "This isn't exactly how I typically build relationships. Running from shadowy government projects while protecting a musically gifted child isn't your standard dating approach." Richard's attempt at humor surprised even himself. Victoria's laugh was genuine, a warm sound that seemed to brighten the room. "Believe it or not, no, though it has certain advantages over charity galas and business dinners." "Such as?" "You see who people really are in a crisis." Her eyes held his, what they value, what they're willing to fight for. The moment stretched between them, weighted with unspoken possibility. Then Victoria's secure phone buzzed, her investigator confirming his arrival time for morning. The spell broken, they returned to tactical planning, reviewing escape routes and contingency plans. But something had shifted, a door opened that couldn't easily be closed again. As they finally retired to separate bedrooms, Richard paused in the hallway. "Victoria." She turned, her auburn hair catching the low light. "Yes?" Thank you, not just for the legal help or the safe houses, for treating Melody like a person, not a curiosity or an asset. That means everything. Victoria's professional mask softened. She's an extraordinary child, Richard, and not just because of her abilities. She hesitated, then added, "You've done an amazing job raising her, especially under the circumstances." The simple validation of his parenting, his choices, his sacrifices hit Richard with unexpected force. A warmth spread through his chest, unfamiliar but welcome. "Good night, Victoria." "Good night, Richard." As he checked on Melody one last time, finding her sleeping peacefully with her small hands curled near her face, Richard allowed himself a moment of hope. Against all odds, they had found allies, created distance from their pursuers, and begun to understand the threat they faced. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, in this fortress on the mountainside, they were safe. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a beginning. What Richard couldn't know was that 30 miles away, in a nondescript office building, Jonathan Pierce was reviewing satellite imagery of Victoria's lake house, his face illuminated by computer screens. Beside him stood Elizabeth, her expression a complex mixture of guilt and resolve. "They've gone to ground," Pierce said, his cultured voice clipped with frustration. "But it's only temporary. No one hides forever." "What about our government contacts?" Elizabeth asked. "The authorization you mentioned?" Pierce's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Being processed as we speak. By this time tomorrow, Project Resonance will have official sanction to recover all assets necessary for national security." He turned to Elizabeth, "Including your daughter." Elizabeth looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "And Richard?" "Mr. Cooper has become a liability. His military background makes him particularly dangerous to our objectives." "You promised no one would be hurt," Elizabeth said quickly, alarm flashing across her face. Pierce's expression remained cold. "And you promised you could convince him to cooperate. We've all failed to deliver on certain expectations." As Elizabeth left the office, her steps faltering slightly, Pierce returned his attention to the screens. One displayed a photograph of Melody playing piano, her small face alight with the joy of music. Beside it was a brain scan showing unusual activity patterns in the auditory cortex. "Extraordinary," he murmured, "the most promising subject we have found, and the answer to questions I've been asking for 30 years. He picked up a secure phone, dialing a number from memory. "General, it's Pierce. Project Resonance is proceeding to Phase 2 recovery." "Yes, sir, the Cooper girl. She's the key to everything." Dawn broke over the mountain ridge in bands of gold and crimson, illuminating the fortress-like cabin with the day's first light. Richard Cooper had been awake for hours, maintaining watch from the cabin's observation point, a concealed platform with sightlines in all directions. The forest below lay peaceful in morning mist, betraying no signs of pursuit. Yet, inside, Victoria was already moving efficiently through the main room, secure satellite phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in hushed, urgent tones with her investigator. She had dressed for practicality rather than her usual courtroom elegance. Dark jeans, hiking boots, and a fitted thermal shirt. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, but even in crisis mode, she radiated competence and authority. Richard entered silently, years of special operations training making his movements nearly soundless. Victoria acknowledged him with a slight nod, continuing her conversation without breaking rhythm. "Confirm arrival time. Yes, full documentation. No digital copies, hard copy only. Extreme caution on approach." She ended the call, turning to Richard. "Marcus is an hour out. He's bringing everything he's found on Pierce, the Foundation, and Project Resonance. Any surveillance on the roads leading here?" Victoria shook her head. "Mumming yet, but he's taking an extremely circuitous route. Multiple vehicle changes, no electronic devices." Richard approved of the precautions. "Melody's still sleeping. She was restless during the night. Nightmares, I think." Victoria's expression softened. Not surprising, considering what she's been through. She moved to the kitchen, starting coffee with the practiced motions of someone for whom early mornings were routine. "I've been thinking about what Melody did yesterday with those sound patterns. The physical effects were real, Richard. I felt them." "So did I." Richard accepted the mug she offered, their fingers brushing briefly, which means Elizabeth was telling the truth about the Foundation's interest in her abilities, and possibly about their government connections. Victoria leaned against the counter, her green eyes troubled. My Justice Department contact isn't responding to secure messages. That's unusual. Richard considered the implications. Someone's interfering with your communications, or your contact has been warned off. Either possibility is concerning. It suggests Pierce does indeed have high-level backing. She sipped her coffee, thinking, we need to understand exactly what Project Resonance is before we can effectively fight it. A small voice came from the hallway. It's about making people do what you want without them knowing why. Melody stood in the doorway, her dark curls tousled from sleep, her expression far too serious for an 8-year-old. She wore mismatched pajamas, the hasty packing evident, but carried herself with a composure that seemed beyond her years. Good morning, sweetheart, Richard said gently. Did you sleep okay? Melody shrugged, padding into the kitchen area. I had weird dreams about music that changes people's brains. She climbed onto a stool at the counter. That's what Project Resonance is. They want to make special music that can control people. Victoria exchanged a glance with Richard before addressing Melody directly. How do you know that, Melody? I heard Mom and Mr. Pierce talking about it in the car, and she hesitated, looking uncertain. Sometimes I just know things about music, about what different sounds do to people's minds. Richard placed a comforting hand on his daughter's shoulder. What kind of things, sweetheart? Melody's small fingers began tapping rhythmically on the countertop. Everyone's brain has its own rhythm, like a song that keeps playing underneath all your thoughts. If you can hear that rhythm, you can change it, make people feel things, think things. She looked up at Victoria. Like yesterday, when I made those men feel dizzy, I heard their brain songs and played a counter rhythm. Victoria knelt to Melody's eye level, her expression gentle but serious. And you can hear these brain songs all the time? Melody nodded. Mostly I ignore them. It's like background noise. But I can tune in if I want to. She pointed to her father. Dad's has a steady beat, like a march, but with quiet parts that sound sad sometimes. Her finger shifted to Victoria. Yours is more complicated. Lots of layers, fast-thinking rhythms on top, but deeper, stronger patterns underneath. Richard felt a chill run through him that had nothing to do with the mountain air. His daughter wasn't just musically gifted. She was perceiving something most humans couldn't detect, something fundamental about neural patterns. No wonder Pierce wanted her for his project. Melody, Victoria said carefully, did your mother or Mr. Pierce ever have you play specific patterns to see what effect they had? Melody shook her head. They wanted to, but Mom said they needed special equipment first, to measure brainwaves while I played. Her expression darkened. Mr. Pierce said they would do baseline testing when we got to the special school. Richard's jaw tightened. Testing sounded clinical, experimental, not something any father wanted for his child. Victoria stood, businesslike again. Let's get you some breakfast, Melody. My investigator will be here soon, and he might have more questions about what you've heard and observed. As Victoria prepared a simple breakfast of oatmeal and fruit, Richard observed his daughter with new eyes. He'd always known she was special, had recognized her musical gift early and nurtured it as best he could with limited resources. But this was something else entirely, an ability that blurred the line between artistic talent and something almost supernatural. No wonder the Foundation was willing to violate laws to acquire her. If what Melody described was real, and the evidence suggested it was, her abilities could revolutionize fields from medicine to military applications, from therapy to social control. The implications were staggering and terrifying. Marcus Daniels arrived precisely on schedule, driving an anonymous-looking pickup truck that had seen better days. Victoria's investigator was a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a military haircut and the watchful eyes of someone who had spent decades observing human behavior. He carried a weathered leather briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. After Victoria performed introductions, they gathered around the dining table, spreading out documents, photographs, and transcripts of interviews. Melody had been set up in another room with her keyboard and headphones, allowing the adults to speak freely. Jonathan Pierce, Marcus began without preamble, placing a photograph on the table. 72 years old. Former Army intelligence specialized in psychological operations. After retirement, he established the Youth Arts Foundation 15 years ago, ostensibly to nurture musical talent in underprivileged children. The man in the photograph looked distinguished and benevolent, silver-haired, patrician features, the kind of face that inspired instant trust. Richard studied it carefully, memorizing details. His military record is heavily redacted, Marcus continued, but I found references to something called Project Harmony in declassified documents from the 1980s. It was allegedly researching the effects of specific sound frequencies on human cognitive function. The predecessor to Project Resonance, Victoria surmised. Marcus nodded. Exactly. Project Harmony was officially shut down in 1908 due to ethical concerns and inconclusive results. My sources suggest the real reason was more troubling. They were achieving results, but couldn't control them consistently. Richard leaned forward. What kind of results? Induced emotional states, primarily. They could make subjects feel fear, euphoria, rage, or tranquility using specific sound patterns. But the effects were unpredictable, varying widely between individuals. They needed a way to personalize the sound patterns to each subject's unique neural signature. Victoria's eyes widened slightly, which is exactly what Melody can perceive. These brain songs, she describes. Precisely. Marcus extracted more documents from his briefcase. Pierce never accepted the project's termination. He continued researching privately, eventually developing the theory that certain individuals, particularly musically gifted children, might possess heightened sensitivity to these neural patterns. So he created the foundation as a screening mechanism, Richard said, the pieces clicking together, identifying gifted children who might have this sensitivity. That's our theory. The foundation has evaluated over 10,000 children in the past 15 years. Only about 50 have been selected for their special program. Richard felt sick. What happened to those children? Marcus's expression grew grim. That's where it gets murky. Officially, they received specialized musical training at the foundation's private facilities. In reality, they were research subjects, testing various sound patterns, measuring brain responses, attempting to refine the technology. And the parents allowed this? Victoria asked incredulously. Most were from disadvantaged backgrounds, offered significant financial incentives. The foundation presented it as an elite educational opportunity with scientific components. Many families saw it as a path out of poverty. Richard's mind went to the desperate measures he'd taken to provide for Melody after Elizabeth left. The extra jobs, the sacrifices, the constant financial stress. Under different circumstances, might he have been vulnerable to such an offer? What about Elizabeth's connection to Pierce? Victoria asked, redirecting the conversation. Marcus hesitated, glancing at Richard. This is where it gets complicated and personal. Richard steeled himself. Just tell me. Elizabeth Cooper isn't Pierce's niece, as we initially suspected. Marcus slid forward an old photograph, a much younger Jonathan Pierce with his arm around a pretty dark-haired woman. She's his daughter. The revelation hit Richard like a physical blow. That's impossible. I knew her family. She never mentioned. She didn't know until recently, Marcus explained. Elizabeth was born to Pierce's girlfriend in 1979, but he abandoned them when the relationship ended. He had no contact with Elizabeth throughout her childhood. Victoria studied the photograph closely. When did she discover the connection? Approximately 3 years ago. Shortly after, she began working for the foundation. Marcus's expression was sympathetic as he turned to Richard. According to my sources, Pierce sought her out specifically because of Melody. Richard's mind raced. How would he even know about Melody? Elizabeth left when she was 2. The foundation has a sophisticated monitoring system for identifying potential candidates. School music programs, youth competitions, even social media videos of children playing instruments. Somehow, Melody came to their attention, despite your efforts to keep her life private. Victoria was reviewing another document. Pierce approached Elizabeth, revealed his identity as her father, and offered her a position at the foundation, specifically to help recruit Melody into the program. The betrayal was almost too much to comprehend. She would use our daughter like that? After abandoning her? Marcus continued methodically, despite the emotional weight of his revelations. Pierce offered Elizabeth what she'd always wanted: recognition, status, a relationship with her biological father. And she was likely told a sanitized version of Project Resonance, presented as groundbreaking research that would help people. Victoria's expression had hardened, or she knew exactly what she was doing. People have compromised their morals for far less. Richard stood abruptly, needing physical movement to process the information. He paced the length of the room, his military training battling with the emotional turmoil of discovering his ex-wife's true motives. "None of this explains why they're moving so aggressively now," he said finally. "The emergency custody filing, the kidnapping attempt, the talk of government authorization." Marcus had saved his most critical information for last. 2 weeks ago, the foundation received preliminary approval for significant defense funding. Project Resonance is being fast-tracked for potential field applications. "What kind of applications?" Victoria asked. "Crowd control, interrogation enhancement, even battlefield deployment. The ability to induce specific emotional states in target populations would revolutionize psychological operations." Richard stopped pacing. "They're weaponizing it." "Yes, and based on what you've described of Melody's abilities, she represents a quantum leap forward in their research. She can intuitively create effective sound patterns without the extensive trial and error they've been forced to use." Victoria's analytical mind was already racing ahead. So Pierce isn't just trying to recover a research subject. He's trying to secure a critical component of a weapon system that has millions, possible billions in defense contracts attached to it, and significant national security implications, which explains the high-level interference, Marcus confirmed. "My sources indicate Pierce has promised a demonstration for military officials next week, a breakthrough that will secure full project funding." Richard's blood ran cold. With Melody as the centerpiece, a somber silence fell over the room as the full scope of their situation became clear. This wasn't just a custody battle or even a fight against an unethical research program. They were challenging a powerful military-industrial complex with virtually unlimited resources. Victoria broke the silence, her voice steely with determination. "So we need to move quickly, before Pierce secures official authorization to take Melody by force." Marcus nodded. "I've prepared documentation for media outlets, oversight committees, and select members of Congress. Evidence of the Foundation's unethical practices, coercion of families, and exploitation of children. Once released, it would trigger investigations that even Pierce's connections couldn't completely suppress. But we'd need proof of the military connection to really force action," Victoria pointed out. "Which is in these documents," Marcus tapped his briefcase, "but would be dismissed as circumstantial without stronger evidence." Richard's tactical mind had been processing possibilities throughout the conversation. "We need to get inside the Foundation's research facility, document exactly what they're doing, obtain hard evidence of the weaponization program, and expose everything simultaneously." Victoria looked skeptical. "That's incredibly risky. Their facilities will be heavily secured." "I can get in," Richard said with quiet confidence. "I've infiltrated more heavily guarded installations in active war zones." "Not alone," Victoria countered immediately. "I'm coming with you." Richard shook his head. "Too dangerous. You need to stay with Melody." "I'm not letting you." Their argument was interrupted by a soft but clear voice from the doorway. "I should go too." All three adults turned to find Melody standing there, headphones around her neck, expression solemn. "Melody, no," Richard began, but she cut him off with a certainty that seemed beyond her years. "I can help, Dad. I can hear things you can't, feel things you can't." Her small face was set with determination. "And I can protect us with the sound patterns if we need it." Richard knelt before his daughter, taking her hands in his. "Absolutely not, Melody. It's too dangerous. These people want to use you for experiments. But they're already looking for me everywhere," she reasoned with child's logic. "And they'll keep looking. Forever, maybe." Her dark eyes, so like his own, held a wisdom that broke his heart. "Sometimes in your war stories, you said the best defense is a good offense." Victoria knelt beside Richard, addressing Melody gently. Sweetie, what you're suggesting is incredibly brave, but your father is right. Our job is to protect you, not put you at risk. Melody looked between them. But what if I'm the only one who can stop them? What if my music is supposed to help people, not hurt them? The room fell silent, the adults exchanging troubled glances. Melody's question had cut to the heart of their dilemma: how to protect her extraordinary gift while ensuring it wasn't exploited for harmful purposes. Marcus cleared his throat. There may be a compromise. The foundation is hosting a private concert tomorrow night at their Connecticut facility, a demonstration for potential donors and, I suspect, military observers. Security will be present, but less restrictive than usual due to the civilian guests. Victoria frowned. How does that help us? I have credentials that could get 2 people in as prospective donors. Once inside, you could access the research areas while everyone is distracted by the performance. Richard considered the proposal. Melody would still be safely hidden here. No, Melody said with surprising firmness. If you go, they'll catch you. I can feel it. She tapped her chest. In here, like a warning in the music. Richard had learned not to dismiss his daughter's intuitions. What do you mean, sweetheart? They know how you think, Dad. Mom told them about your military training. They'll be expecting something like that. Her small fingers found Richard's, squeezing with urgent conviction. But they don't know about Victoria, about how you work together. Victoria and Richard exchanged a look of surprise, not at Melody's insight itself, but at her articulation of something they'd both felt but not expressed. Their remarkable professional compatibility, the way their different skills and perspectives created something stronger together. She has a point, Victoria said quietly. Your military approach, combined with my legal understanding and connections, it's a synergy they might not anticipate. Richard wasn't fully convinced. It's still too dangerous to bring Melody anywhere near the foundation. Marcus interjected thoughtfully. What if we created a diversion, information suggesting Melody is being moved to a different location? Draw their resources away from Connecticut while you infiltrate. The strategy had merit. Richard's tactical mind began mapping out possibilities, contingencies, escape routes. We'd need absolute confirmation of Melody's safety before proceeding. I can arrange that, Marcus assured him. A secure location with trusted personnel, former colleagues with appropriate skills. Victoria was already thinking further ahead. Once we have the evidence, we need simultaneous media exposure, legal filings, and political pressure. Too broad for them to suppress quickly. As the adults continued planning, Melody watched them with relief. They were listening to her, not just dismissing her concerns as childish fears. Her father had always respected her thoughts, but having Victoria treat her as a participant rather than just a child to be protected made her feel stronger, more capable. She slipped away quietly, returning to her keyboard. As the adults' voices continued in the background, Melody closed her eyes and began to play. Not the disturbing patterns from yesterday, but something new. A composition that seemed to strengthen resolve, sharpen focus, enhance clarity. The notes flowed from her fingers intuitively, forming patterns that resonated with the brain's natural rhythms, but amplified its better qualities. In the main room, Richard paused mid-sentence, noticing the music. Do you feel that? Victoria nodded, looking slightly surprised. Clarity, like a mental fog lifting. Marcus seemed less affected, but noted their reactions with interest. She's doing it right now, isn't she? Creating one of those patterns. Richard moved to the doorway, watching his daughter play with focused intensity, her small face serene with concentration. The music wasn't controlling his thoughts. He could still consider options freely, evaluate risks clearly, but it seemed to optimize his cognitive function, helping him see connections and possibilities more readily. This is what Pierce wants to weaponize, he said quietly. But look at what it could be instead. A tool for healing, for enhancing human potential. Victoria joined him, her expression softening as she watched Melody. She's extraordinary, Richard. Not just her abilities, but her heart. She instinctively uses her gift to help, not control. The moment crystallized Richard's resolve. They would protect Melody not just from physical harm, but from those who would corrupt her unique abilities. And to do that, they needed to end the threat permanently, not just hide from it. Marcus, he said, turning back to the investigator, set up the diversion. Make it convincing. His gaze met Victoria's, finding the same determination reflected there. We're going to infiltrate the foundation, gather the evidence, and shut down Project Resonance for good. Victoria nodded, her attorney's precision complementing his military decisiveness. I'll prepare the legal and media strategy. Once we have the evidence, we'll need to move with overwhelming force on all fronts. As they returned to planning, the music from the other rooms shifted slightly, still clarifying and focusing, but now with an undercurrent of something that felt like hope. Melody had created her own contribution to their mission, supporting them in the way only she could. Richard couldn't help but smile slightly, despite the gravity of their situation. His daughter wasn't just a passive participant in this crisis. She was an active agent in her own protection, using her extraordinary gift on her own terms. Pride mingled with his determination. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, not just as father and daughter, but as allies in a cause that transcended personal safety. They were fighting for Melody's future, yes, but also for something larger. The right to determine how gifts are used, the rejection of exploitation disguised as progress, the protection of children from those who would use them as mere tools. It was, Richard realized, the most important mission of his life. The Foundation's Connecticut facility gleamed in the early evening light, its modern architecture of glass and stone designed to project artistic sophistication and philanthropic legitimacy. Floodlights illuminated the manicured grounds where valets in crisp uniforms directed luxury vehicles to designated parking areas. Guests in formal attire made their way toward the main building, where the private concert would showcase the remarkable achievements of the Foundation's gifted students. Victoria Morgan stepped from a chauffeured black sedan, the picture of wealthy sophistication in a midnight blue evening gown and subtle diamond jewelry. Her auburn hair was elegantly styled, her makeup flawless. No one would connect this polished socialite with the determined attorney who had been fighting the Foundation in court days earlier. Richard Cooper exited after her, nearly unrecognizable in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. His military bearing translated well to formal wear, giving him the confident posture of someone accustomed to power. His beard had been precisely trimmed, his hair expertly styled. With Victoria on his arm, they appeared to be exactly what their false identities suggested: a wealthy power couple interested in supporting gifted children through charitable giving. "Invitation, sir?" the attendant at the entrance asked politely. Richard presented the credentials Marcus had provided, identifying them as representatives of a private family foundation looking to diversify their philanthropic portfolio. "Ah, Mr. and Mrs. Lancaster. We're delighted you could join us this evening." The attendant checked their names against the guest list. "Mr. Pierce is particularly interested in speaking with you about potential collaboration opportunities." Victoria smiled graciously. "We're looking forward to it. We've heard remarkable things about the Foundation's work." As they entered this grand atrium, Richard maintained the relaxed demeanor of their cover while his trained eyes systematically assessed the environment: security personnel positions, surveillance camera locations, exit routes. Victoria did the same, her legal mind cataloging faces, identifying key Foundation board members she recognized from her research. "Security is heavy but discreet," Richard murmured as they accepted champagne from a passing server. Armed guards at all exits, plainclothes personnel circulating among the guests. Victoria sipped her champagne, using the motion to mask her words. "Pierce is by the staircase, speaking with the gray-haired man in the Navy suit. That's General William Hargrove, Department of Defense, Advanced Research Projects." Richard nodded slightly. "Military connection confirmed. And there's Elizabeth, 10 o'clock, red dress." Elizabeth Cooper stood among a group of Foundation staff, looking elegant but tense. Her eyes scanned the crowd continuously, perhaps searching for signs of Richard or Victoria despite their disguises. "She seems nervous," Victoria observed. "Good. Nervous people make mistakes." They circulated through the gathering, playing their roles perfectly, expressing appropriate interest in the Foundation's work, engaging in bland small talk with other guests, gradually working their way closer to the restricted areas of the facility. According to the blueprints Marcus had obtained, the research labs were located in the East Wing, behind security doors that required keycard access. Ladies and gentlemen, a cultured voice announced over discreet speakers, the concert will begin in 15 minutes. Please make your way to the performance hall. As guests began moving toward the designated area, Richard and Victoria drifted in the opposite direction, toward a service corridor that would provide access to the East Wing. Their timing needed to be precise. The beginning of the concert would create the maximum distraction, with all attention focused on the stage. "Wait," Victoria whispered suddenly, gripping Richard's arm. "Elizabeth is watching us." Richard didn't turn, maintaining their casual pace. "Has she recognized us?" "I'm not sure. She's moving in our direction." Before they could adjust their approach, Elizabeth intercepted them, a professional smile fixed on her face. "Excuse me, are you the Lancasters? I'm Elizabeth Cooper, the Foundation's Director of Talent Development." Up close, Richard could see the strain beneath her polished exterior, the slightly too bright smile, the tension around her eyes. For her part, Elizabeth showed no sign of recognizing her ex-husband beneath his transformed appearance. Victoria extended her hand smoothly. "Patricia Lancaster, this is my husband, James. We're so looking forward to tonight's performance." Elizabeth shook Victoria's hand, then Richard's. For a moment, as their hands touched, Richard thought he detected a flicker of uncertainty in Elizabeth's eyes. A subconscious recognition, perhaps, quickly suppressed. "Mr. Pierce is particularly interested in speaking with you about our advanced program," Elizabeth continued. "He'll be joining us after the concert for a special presentation on our research initiatives." Victoria affected polite interest. "Research initiatives? I thought the Foundation focused on performance training." "Our mission has expanded in recent years," Elizabeth explained. "We're exploring the therapeutic applications of music, particularly for children with neurological differences." The careful phrasing, sanitized, palatable to potential donors, disguised the true nature of Project Resonance. Richard had to admire the skillful deception, even as it fueled his determination to expose it. "Fascinating," he commented, deliberately lowering his voice to disguise its familiar cadence. "We'd be very interested in learning more." Elizabeth nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Wonderful. Now, if you'll follow me to the performance hall, we have reserved excellent seats for our special guests." This was a complication they hadn't anticipated. Being personally escorted by Elizabeth would make slipping away far more difficult. Richard and Victoria exchanged a subtle glance, silently adjusting their plan. "Actually," Victoria said with apologetic charm, "could you point me toward the ladies' room first? James, why don't you go ahead with Miss Cooper? I'll join you shortly." Elizabeth hesitated only briefly before indicating a corridor to their right. "Of course, the facilities are just down that hallway. The performance hall is through the main doors at the end of the atrium." As Victoria departed, Richard followed Elizabeth toward the concert venue, mentally revising their infiltration strategy. Victoria would now have to access the research wing alone while he maintained their cover at the concert. Not ideal, but they had prepared for contingencies. The performance hall was an architectural marvel, a modern space with perfect acoustics, intimate enough to showcase young performers, yet impressive enough to reflect the Foundation's prestige. Richard was seated in the front row, beside an empty chair for Victoria, with Elizabeth just a few seats away. On his other side was an older military officer whose bearing and subtle insignia identified him as high-ranking intelligence, though he wore no uniform. As the lights dimmed and the audience settled, Richard felt a vibration from the special phone hidden in his jacket, a predetermined signal from Victoria indicating she had successfully accessed the restricted area. Phase 1 complete. The stage lights rose to reveal a single grand piano. A distinguished-looking man stepped forward to the microphone. Jonathan Pierce himself, impeccably dressed, his silver hair and patrician features projecting authority and benevolence. "Distinguished guests, supporters, and friends," Pierce began, his voice warm and compelling. "Tonight represents a milestone in the Foundation's journey. For 15 years, we have sought to nurture extraordinary musical talent in children who might otherwise never have the opportunity to develop their gifts." Richard studied the man intently, this architect of Project Resonance who had manipulated Elizabeth, who had attempted to kidnap Melody, who had transformed children's musical abilities into potential weapons. "What you will witness tonight is not merely musical performance, but a demonstration of human potential that challenges our understanding of cognitive development and neurological function. The language was carefully chosen, technical enough to hint at the research applications without explicitly revealing their military purpose. Richard glanced at the officer beside him, noting his focused attention. This was indeed more than a donor event. It was a demonstration for potential government clients. Our first performer represents the culmination of our most advanced program, Pierce continued, a young prodigy whose abilities exemplify what we call heightened auditory cognitive integration. The side door to the stage opened, and a young girl of perhaps 10 entered, taking her place at the piano. Richard felt a chill of recognition, not because he knew the child, but because of her striking resemblance to Melody. Dark hair, serious expression, small frame. Was this deliberate psychological warfare? A message that Melody was replaceable? As the girl began to play, Richard immediately recognized that her talent, while impressive, lacked the preternatural quality of Melody's performances. The piece was technically perfect, but somehow mechanical, as if the emotional connection had been trained out of her. Throughout the audience, Richard noticed subtle changes in posture and expression as the performance progressed. People seemed to relax, their attention focusing more intensely on the stage. The officer beside him had stopped blinking, his breathing pattern altered. With a jolt of understanding, Richard realized this wasn't just a concert, it was a demonstration of the Foundation's sound pattern technology. The girl was playing a composition specifically designed to affect the audience's cognitive state. Not as powerful as what Melody could create intuitively, but effective nonetheless. Richard drew on his military training, forcing himself to maintain mental discipline against the subtle influence. He checked his watch. Victoria had been gone for 12 minutes. According to their plan, she should be photographing documents and downloading research files from the Foundation's secure servers, using access codes Marcus had obtained through his sources. The young pianist concluded her piece to enthusiastic applause. Richard joined in automatically, while noting the slightly dazed expressions on many audience members' faces. The effect was subtle but unmistakable, a mild suggestibility, an enhanced receptivity, perfect for a fundraising event, or a military demonstration of potential psychological operations capability. Pierce returned to the microphone, his satisfaction evident. Remarkable, isn't it? The power of music to affect our deepest cognitive processes. What you've just experienced is just the beginning of what our research has revealed about the relationship between specific sound patterns in neural function. As Pierce launched into a carefully crafted explanation that blended neuroscience with philanthropic platitudes, Richard felt another vibration from his hidden phone, Victoria's signal that she had secured the evidence and was exiting the restricted area. Relief washed through him. Soon they would be able to make their own exit, complete the mission, and return to Melody. The thought of his daughter safely hidden in Marcus's secure location strengthened Richard's resolve. Tonight's evidence would ensure she would never be hunted by the Foundation again. Pierce was concluding his remarks, moving toward what was clearly the main event of the evening. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to introduce our most advanced student, whose performance will demonstrate the full potential of our harmonic integration techniques. Richard tensed, every instinct suddenly on alert. Something in Pierce's tone had shifted, a note of triumph that seemed premature, excessively confident. The side door opened again, and Richard's world stopped. Melody walked onto the stage wearing a blue dress he'd never seen before, her dark curls arranged in perfect ringlets. She moved woodenly, her expression blank, her eyes unfocused. Richard's heart thundered in his chest, denial warring with the evidence before his eyes. Impossible. Melody was safe, hidden miles away with Marcus's security team. This had to be another girl who resembled her, a psychological tactic to unsettle him. But as she sat at the piano, he knew. The way she positioned her hands, the slight tilt of her head. This was his daughter. Somehow Pierce had found her, taken her, and now intended to use her as the centerpiece of his demonstration. Richard's mind raced, evaluating options, calculating risks. Direct intervention would be suicidal. The room was filled with security personnel, and he had no way of knowing Melody's condition. The blank expression on her face suggested some kind of sedation or control. Where was Victoria? Had she seen Melody? Was she still safely retrieving the evidence, or had she too been captured? As these questions pounded through his mind, Melody began to play. The melody was unlike anything Richard had heard from her before. Technically complex but emotionally empty, as if she were merely a conduit for someone else's composition. Throughout the audience, the effect was immediate and profound. People sat straighter, their expressions becoming mask-like, eyes fixed on the stage with unnatural intensity. The military officer beside Richard gripped the armrests of his chair, his pupils dilating visibly. Richard fought against the sound pattern's influence, drawing on every technique he had learned for resisting psychological manipulation. He forced his breathing to remain steady, used physical pain, fingernails digging into his palm, to maintain mental clarity. Pierce stood at the side of the stage, watching with undisguised triumph as his audience succumbed to the demonstration. His gaze swept the room, assessing the effectiveness of the performance, and for a moment his eyes met Richard's. Recognition flashed across Pierce's face. Despite the disguise, despite the careful preparation, he knew. Richard abandoned all pretense, already calculating his path to the stage, the most efficient way to reach Melody and extract her. Before he could move, however, something changed in his daughter's performance. The melody shifted subtly, the rhythm altering, harmonies transforming. On stage, Melody's blank expression flickered, a hint of her true self emerging. Her fingers moved with increasing conviction, taking the composition in a new direction. Pierce noticed immediately, stepping toward the piano with alarm. "That's enough," he said sharply, reaching for Melody's shoulder. But the music had taken on a life of its own. Throughout the audience, people began blinking, shaking their heads slightly, as if awakening from a trance. The officer beside Richard gasped audibly, putting a hand to his temple. Melody was fighting back through her music, creating a counter-pattern to whatever influence had been used on her in the audience. From the back of the hall came a commotion, guards moving urgently, a disturbance near the entrance. Richard caught a glimpse of auburn hair, a flash of midnight blue. Victoria creating a diversion. It was now or never. Richard surged toward the stage, military training taking over completely. Two security guards moved to intercept him, but he disabled them with precise strikes, not lethal but efficient. Years of close-quarters combat had prepared him for exactly this scenario. Pierce was shouting for more security, trying simultaneously to stop Melody's playing and retreat from the increasingly chaotic scene. The audience was in confusion, some still affected by the initial sound pattern, others coming alert and responding to the disturbance with alarm. Richard reached the stage in seconds, vaulting onto the platform with athletic precision. Pierce turned toward him, fear replacing his earlier confidence. "Cooper, you don't understand what you're interfering with." Richard ignored him, focused entirely on reaching Melody. Her playing continued unabated, the melody now strong and clear, a pattern Richard recognized as her own composition, not the Foundation's programmed piece. "Melody," he called, approaching the piano. "Sweetheart, it's Dad. I'm here." Her eyes found his, recognition flooding her face. "Dad, I knew you'd come." Her fingers never stopped moving across the keys, maintaining the protective patterns she'd created. More security personnel were converging on the stage. Richard positioned himself between them and Melody, prepared to hold them off for as long as necessary. "Stop him," Pierce commanded. "The demonstration isn't complete." The audience was in full disorder now. Some people leaving in confusion, others watching in fascinated horror as the philanthropic concert devolved into chaos. The military officers, however, remained seated, their expressions shifting from enthrallment to disturbing clarity as they processed what they had just experienced. Not a benign demonstration of musical therapy, but a prototype of mind control technology. Victoria's voice cut through the case, amplified by the hall's sound system. She had somehow accessed the controls and was broadcasting throughout the venue. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain calm. I am Victoria Morgan, attorney at law. What you have witnessed tonight is not a legitimate musical performance, but an illegal demonstration of psychological manipulation technology using a child who was kidnapped for this purpose." On stage, Pierce's face contorted with rage. "Shut her down. Now." But Victoria continued relentlessly. The Foundation has been conducting unauthorized human experimentation, particularly on gifted children, developing technology intended for psychological warfare applications. Richard used the distraction to move closer to Melody. "Can you walk, sweetheart? We need to go." Melody nodded, her playing finally ceasing. "They gave me something, Dad. Made me feel foggy. But I remembered what you taught me, how to find myself when I'm scared." Richard's heart swelled with pride even as he maintained tactical awareness of the security personnel still attempting to reach them. "That's my brave girl. Stay behind me now." Pierce made a desperate lunge toward them. "You can't take her. The project needs her unique neural patterns." Richard intercepted him easily, restraining the older man with a precise hold that immobilized without causing injury. "She's not your research subject. She's my daughter." Victoria appeared at the side of the stage, slightly disheveled but triumphant. "Richard, I've transmitted everything to Marcus. The evidence is secure and being distributed to all planned recipients." "Melody?" Richard called urgently. "I'm okay, Dad," she assured him, standing bravely beside the piano. "My head's getting clearer." Victoria reached them, assessing Melody quickly. "We need to move now. I've signaled Marcus. He has people waiting outside." Pierce struggled against Richard's hold. "You have no idea what you're doing. This technology could revolutionize warfare, save countless lives by preventing conflicts before they begin. By controlling people's minds without their knowledge or consent," Victoria retorted. "That's not peace, it's subjugation." Security personnel had formed a perimeter around the stage, but seemed hesitant to approach directly, perhaps influenced by Melody's counterpattern, perhaps uncertain given the high-profile audience witnessing the confrontation. The situation balanced on a knife's edge. They had Melody, they had the evidence, but they were still deep in enemy territory with limited exit options. Then something unexpected happened. The military officer who had been seated beside Richard stood up, approaching the stage with deliberate purpose. The security personnel parted for him automatically, responding to his clear authority. "General Hargrove," Pierce said urgently, "control your asset. Cooper is interfering with a classified defense project." The general surveyed the scene with cold precision, his gaze moving from Pierce to Richard to Melody, and finally to Victoria. "Sauce, Morgan," he said with formal correctness. "I believe you mentioned evidence of unauthorized human experimentation." Victoria stepped forward, maintaining professional composure despite the chaos around them. "Yes, General. Extensive documentation of unethical research practices, coercion of families, and experimental procedures conducted on minors without proper consent or oversight." "Including this child?" The general indicated Melody, who stood close to Richard, watching the exchange with wary intelligence. "Yes, sir," Victoria confirmed. "Melody Cooper was abducted from her secure location earlier today, evidently drugged, and brought here to demonstrate technology that Mr. Pierce has been developing for potential military applications." The general's expression hardened. "Is this accurate, Pierce?" Pierce struggled to regain control of the situation. "William, you've seen the potential. What we demonstrated tonight could revolutionize psychological operations, provide non-lethal alternatives to traditional warfare. By experimenting on American children," the general's voice was ice, "without proper protocols, oversight, or ethical review." "The ends justify the means," Pierce insisted. "We're on the verge of a breakthrough that could change the very nature of conflict." General Hargrove turned to Richard. "You're the father?" "Yes, sir." Richard maintained his military bearing despite the circumstances. "Richard Cooper, former Special Forces." Recognition flickered in the general's eyes. "Cooper, Afghanistan 2011, the Kandahar extraction?" Richard nodded once, surprised to be remembered. "Yes, sir." "Thought so." The general seemed to come to a decision. "Security, stand down. Mr. Pierce is to be detained pending investigation into violations of research ethics protocols and potential kidnapping charges." Pierce's face drained of color. "William, you can't be serious. After everything we've discussed." "What I witnessed tonight," the general interrupted coldly, "was not the controlled research application you promised, but an attempt to manipulate military officials using unauthorized technology tested on a child obtained through coercion. That crosses every line, Jonathan. As security personnel moved to detain Pierce instead of Richard, the balance of power shifted dramatically. Victoria exchanged a surprised glance with Richard. This was an outcome neither had anticipated. General, Victoria said carefully, while we appreciate your intervention, we have documented evidence of systematic abuses throughout the Foundation's operations. This goes beyond Mr. Pierce's actions tonight. The general nodded grimly. I'm aware, Ms. Morgan, your associate has been quite thorough in distributing that evidence to appropriate authorities. I received preliminary documentation myself less than an hour ago, Marcus. Always one step ahead. What happens now? Richard asked, his arm protectively around Melody. A full investigation, conducted by both civilian and military authorities, the general replied. The Foundation's operations will be suspended pending review. All research subjects will be identified and appropriate support provided. He looked directly at Melody, his stern expression softening slightly. Young lady, I owe you an apology on behalf of the United States government. What was done to you should never have happened. Melody regarded him with the direct, unfiltered honesty of childhood. Are you going to make sure it doesn't happen to other kids like me? Yes, the general answered without hesitation. I give you my word. As Pierce was led away, protesting futilely about national security and scientific progress, Richard finally allowed himself to fully embrace Melody, kneeling to her level and gathering her in his arms. I was so scared, Dad, she whispered against his shoulder. They came to Mr. Marcus's safe house. Mom was with them. She told me you sent her. Richard closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this final betrayal. I would never do that, sweetheart. Never. I know. That's why I fought back when they made me play their music. I remembered what you always say, that music should come from the heart, not just the fingers. Victoria joined them, placing a gentle hand on Melody's back. You were incredibly brave, Melody. The way you changed the music, broke their pattern, that was remarkable. General Hargrove approached again, having given orders to his subordinates. Mr. Cooper, Ms. Morgan, we'll need formal statements from all of you, including Melody, but it can wait until tomorrow. I suggest you take her home now. She's had enough trauma for one day. Home. The word resonated deeply. Not the Brooklyn apartment, not Victoria's mountain cabin, but the concept itself, safety, belonging, family. As they made their way through the now subdued crowd, Melody between them, Victoria leaned close to Richard. Elizabeth wasn't among those detained. She disappeared during the confusion. Richard absorbed this information with grim acknowledgement. One loose end, one final concern. But for now, Melody was safe. The Foundation's research exposed, Pierce's operations shut down. The immediate threat had been neutralized. Outside, Marcus waited with an unmarked SUV, his expression revealing both relief at their safety and anger at how Melody had been taken from his protection. Richard, I can't apologize enough. They had countermeasures we hadn't anticipated. We'll discuss it later, Richard said, not unkindly. Right now, we just need to get Melody somewhere safe. As they drove away from the Foundation facility, now swarming with both military and civilian authorities, Melody leaned against Richard's side, exhaustion finally claiming her. Victoria sat on her other side, the three of them forming a protective unit. Where to? Marcus asked from the driver's seat. Richard and Victoria exchanged a glance over Melody's sleeping form. Home, Victoria said simply. My house in the city. It's secure, comfortable, and has that piano Melody liked. Richard nodded, something warm unfurling in his chest despite the day's traumas. Home it is. The night had brought resolution, but not completion. There would be the statements to give, investigations to support, legal proceedings to navigate. Elizabeth remained at large, her motives and future actions uncertain. The public exposure of Project Resonance would create ripples through military, scientific, and governmental circles. But watching his daughter sleep peacefully between them, Richard allowed himself to acknowledge what they had accomplished. They had protected Melody not just from physical harm, but from exploitation. They had exposed an unethical research program that had victimized dozens of gifted children. They had, in their own way, made the world slightly safer for children with extraordinary abilities. And in the process, they had forged something unexpected, a connection that transcended their initial professional arrangement. Victoria caught his eye, a smile touching her lips despite her evident fatigue. Without words, they shared a moment of mutual recognition, of battles fought together, of trust earned, of futures suddenly containing new possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, as the SUV carried them towards safety, Richard Cooper allowed himself the unfamiliar luxury of hope. Not just for Melody's security, but for something he had long ago stopped believing possible. A second chance at family, at wholeness, at the kind of partnership that made both individuals stronger. As if sensing his thoughts, Victoria's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers intertwining with his own. The gesture required no words, no declarations, just the simple acknowledgement of a journey begun together and a path forward that neither had anticipated, but both now welcomed. In the front seat, Marcus discreetly adjusted the rearview mirror, hiding a smile of his own. Some missions, he reflected, achieved objectives far beyond their original parameters. This undoubtedly was one of them.